Well, hi, everybody. This is part 3 in the epic saga of flow. So far, we've had sort of an introductory session with that Jason and I did, sort of introducing this idea of smart housing and the capitalist kibbutz and sociobiology. And then Leo, our friend who is so knowledgeable about Web3 and blockchain finance around ecosystem services. We talked about like how the environmental part is going to be linked in to what we think of, like Adam Neumann and Marc Andreessen are setting up with this flow enterprise of providing living experiences that give people equity in the value created in their multi-use plan developments. And so today, Lynn and I are going to go talk a little bit about some of the use cases that I think may be relevant, linking in Web3 and human capital and the smart environment, because Lynn is in Dallas, and Dallas is a smart city. So maybe we can start off, Lynn, for people who aren't like necessarily haven't followed our work before. Like, can you just give a little bit of overview of who you are and how we came to connect and like the stuff that we're interested in together?
Yeah, so in 2016, we were just Facebook friends. I didn't know you, but we had participated in an interview with Alice Linehan, and we were talking about the things that we were seeing at the local level. You were seeing some of the same things with the takeover of your schools, the shutting down of schools and the corporate influence. And then we had started to see the gamification of education and technology. And we also talked about artificial intelligence and some of the things in education, which
we didn't even know where it was going to go, Lynn. We did not know where it was going to go.
We did not. And then you came to town to stay with me on your way to Tulsa, and you wrote this great article about the tale of two blockchains. But while you were here, we had a kind of a serendipitous meet or
an opportunity
field trip, I guess say. Yeah, a field trip at Old Parkland, and you wrote about our experience there. And so, yeah, just it's been a journey talking about social impact finance and how that has crept into our schools. So yeah, we just collaborated over the years, and we've become good friends, and on occasion travel together to places like Utah.
Right, to learn more about transhumanism, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm in Philadelphia and Lynn is in Dallas, so we're both in these sort of big cities that are understood as smart city projects, sustainability projects, and so we came in through the education door, and I think because of that, we could see the way in which like data was being used to inform the AI. And we could also see, I think we had sort of a front row seat on the way in which the privacy conversation, because there were all sorts of data leaks between Children's Youth Ed Tech, how that was sort of set up. And not that I'm saying in any way that that's a good thing to have happened, but those leaks, those disasters with the sort of leaks of data or sale of data, of corporate data collected in classroom settings, then would sort of usher in this idea that people would have their own, learning locker to control their own data moving forward. So I want to start out with the first image. Cliff and Jason and I watched the Hulu documentary featuring WeWork. I'm like, what the heck happened with WeWork? And WeWork is what preceded this flow concept that Adam Neumann, in partnership with Marc Andreessen, who is a leader in the Web3 fintech space. So WeWork came first, and it was essentially a big controversy, just like I think a lot of these ed tech controversies are. They're set up to set the stage for the next act in the play, right? And so Cliff and I and Jason and I were going through this documentary, and it's very interesting because they keep wanting to uplift Adam Neumann and how crazy that thing was that happened with the WeWork, which is the co-working space, and how they had a $47 billion valuation that dropped to like 20% of its valuation in a few weeks because of this terrible IPO document. And it's all just a story that's being told. But in the documentary, Jason was pulling clips for me to include. And I said, stop. Like, and this was just the backdrop for one of these big staged events that Adam Neumann at WeWork would have with the various members of their co-working communities. And throughout the documentary, there was an emphasis on love. Like, and a lot of their branding in like the coffee cups and things that were in the WeWork space would say, do what you love, in this cursive letters, do what you love, do what you love. And that was sort of threaded throughout the movie, this graphic branding about love. And so in this image, you have, it's a stage with, again, the magenta and blue lighting. And evidently he was a fan of gongs, but behind on the screen is a key. And at the top of the key has a heart. And within the heart is we. And, you know, I've talked with Jason about this a little bit, that what Adam Neumann imagined he was doing was building a capitalist kibbutz. Like this, you weren't just renting co-working space, you were being a member of a community, right? And it was all about love and saving the world. But in one of the conversations he had with, Adam Neumann had with Marc Andreessen, when they were talking about their new idea of flow and how, you know, you should know your neighbors, and how Americans don't know their neighbors. But in Israel, where Adam Neumann grew up, like, you knew your neighbors. And he literally had this little story where he said, well, like say, you know, you need some salt, you run out of salt. And so you go knock on your neighbor's door and they're not home. And, but you know where the key is. So you get the key and then you go take all their salt. And then you take it home, but you don't give it back. And when your neighbor finds out all their salt is gone, they go, oh, Adam took it. And that was the story. And it's very strange because they're like, you know, like there are these ideas of borrowing from a neighbor, but usually you're borrowing like a cup of sugar or milk or eggs or something. You borrow it, you don't take it, and you don't take it while they're not in their house. So you don't take all of it and not give it back. But salt is actually, when I looked up the symbolism, it's linked to alchemy, salt, sulfur, and mercury, but it's also, the salt is earth, the feminine, consciousness, the soul. And it's also connected to currency and electronic conduction. That's Steffers had filled me in on that. But so Adam Neumann, knowing where your key is and going in your house and taking all your salt, starts to feel a little bit creepy. But, you know, I'm thinking that the key is sort of like your private key on the blockchain. And actually, he and his wife, their next school is called Soulful. So imagine like what they're taking in terms of what the salt represents, like your connection to the earth, the sacred feminine, your consciousness and your soul is kind of interesting. But I wanted to start this off because we've had some of these conversations about the heart and the importance of like the heart field. And also I put in this image, a screenshot of my friend Steffers. She wrote a blog piece at A Piece of Mindful called Getting to the Heart of the Social Distancing Matter, that was really looking at the heart field, the toroidal field, the bioenergetic fields, and looking at the research that was being done by this Heart Math Institute about the power of bioelectricity and the power of that heart. So I don't know.
We talked a bit about just the earth being a torus, thinking of it like a donut where the energy moves through the center, and then your heart being a torus, as she wrote about, and the field of the heart, the electromagnetic field of the heart being 3 to 10 feet or so, and so having us be 6 feet apart for social distancing. It's interesting. Also, I want to point out too that there's a verse there in the Bible. So Old Testament and New Testament talks about salt and being and if we are the salt and we've lost our saltiness, then what good are we out there? Meaning our heart, our character, our losing our anchor or our substance, I guess, or our flavor.
Okay.
I don't know if that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's looking to take I mean, and that's the essence of who we are as individuals and putting us into the hive mind ant computer. So I feel like
is the verse, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet.
Wow. So don't let Adam have your keys. Your private key to your digital identity. I think that's, so I think, and, I just had someone leave a comment on one of my posts, and I think actually it was probably just a troll, because I looked it up and it didn't have any content. It was a strange random, address on there. But it was essentially saying like, oh, I don't know how you can talk about these things and just in such a matter-of-fact manner and then not have solutions or whatever. And I think that that's probably someone who hasn't actually paid attention to how we talk about things, because for us, I feel like we're not nihilistic about any of this, but probably like the answer actually comes from within in our heart space, like our collective heart space, especially as mothers, because that's how we connected over these issues, is understanding that something was wrong in the spaces that were, where the children were, and then trying to figure it out, right? But you can't actually figure it out until you actually have a sense of what the story is. And there are so many stories floating around out there that it obscures often some of the what's happening in the background.
I think their solutions are always synthetic, and I would argue that our solutions are more organic and in the authentic heart space, connecting with people in an authentic way rather than trying to produce a counterfeit or a twin of something.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the heart is sort of like, what comes next. And so the other piece that I was talking about with Leo is looking at an energy economy and this sustainability. And, Steffers has been doing a lot of research into the nanotechnology space, bio nanotechnology. And, interestingly, it seems like there's an effort towards biocomputation, like integrating us through our bodies into energetic systems that I think will be advanced in the name of sustainability. But first off, it will be framed as like health and wellness activities. And so the digital identity use case that's probably the most prominent in the Dallas area has to do with the blockchain transcripts that are happening through green light credentials. But could you speak a little bit, because like Greenlight's overstepped well beyond just tracking academic coursework. At this point, they're also going into things like athletics and physical fitness. And you had some thoughts about the Cooper Institute too, because they were like a center of aerobics. That's the heart again?
Yes. And so Kenneth Cooper is the father of aerobics. And what's interesting is that my degree, so I switched from education in my last year, lost all those credits and shifted to a degree in corporate wellness and with a minor in psychology. And so when I came out after my internship, I interviewed with the Cooper Aerobics Center in their department that actually does this student physical fitness report card. And I was so nervous. So nervous. I thought I was going to throw up. And, I wanted the job so badly because it was really a renowned institute and very well known in Dallas. It has this beautiful campus, and they're at the forefront of all this fitness. And so anyway, I didn't get the job because I screwed up. She tested me. She said, "Can you maybe do something with the printer?" And I messed it up, so I didn't get the job. Okay, so the Cooper Aerobics Center. So now they've partnered with Greenlight Credentials to track now the physical fitness. And it's interesting that Kenneth Cooper was instrumental in getting legislation passed decades ago to make it compulsory for the school districts to test the children's physical fitness, because it's good for them. And so fast forward now today, Greenlight has partnered with the Cooper Aerobics Center to track not only with Cooper, it's the physical fitness data, but in the other categories, it is to hold and store their credentials, verifying their transcripts, all their academic data, also mental health data, the physical fitness data, and then vaccine history, so they can upload their meningitis shots for when they go to college, that kind of thing.
Well, so I have a slide here for people who are maybe just listening and don't see the slide. So on one, it has a group of kids but they're not really in athletic gear. They're just in shorts and like running through a meadow or something. Their hair is flowing. Fitness is the foundation, accelerating opportunities by supporting a complete picture of wellness, right? They want because they want all the data. They want your digital twin. They want your portrait, right? Portrait of a graduate. And then underneath is from their Twitter feed, the green light fitness gram. Look, March 13th through 19th is Brain Awareness Week. Right. And so join us as we discuss how fitness impacts student cognition and academic performance. So they're listing linking the physical fitness to the academic data. And then again, beyond the fitness, then there's also the mental health, which is getting into the consciousness space. So this slide has a, a woman who's sort of tearing up, and she has some, a woman putting her hand on her shoulder. Oh, accelerating better health outcomes. And again, the outcomes are data by enabling digital systems of care for mental health, digital. So like you're not going to actually get to talk to someone who'll put their hand on your shoulder. You're going to get to talk to an app.
And the mental health app that they have through Greenlight is done in Dallas ISD and the community college. They can access this mental health app.
And I mean, that's concerning because, that's really sensitive information. And I remember when I first when I was visiting you, actually, somehow I came across, I was doing one of my little sys maps, that the woman who was behind the crisis text hotline had sold all of the data to a corporate training firm called, what was it? It was a poisonous lemur. Like I remember the name of it, like she's like, oh, and the name of our company is named after a poisonous lemur. And they actually used all of this really sensitive data to push it into like training for call centers. And I just remember being shocked at thinking about like how the mental health data is used. But then of course the next frame will be, but if it's on blockchain, you don't have to worry, right? Not to worry. You have your, just don't give Adam your key and it's all great. Your blockchain identity will be fine. So I thought it was interesting. This app is called Balance. And I guess there's something different than Vital Sign 6. Maybe Vital Sign 6 is a tool that's a depression screening tool, but this is an app. It says to support
UT Southwestern, the Vital Sign 6 app is that Madhukar Trivedi, the guy who's made millions off of big pharma, is now in this space.
Yeah, you're in your mind, your mind. And so it uses an innovative web-based iPad app to administer patient health questionnaires. And it's actually, I was a little bit shocked, like evidently like the police officers are using it now. They're like, oh, the police have to see terrible things, so they need a depression app.
Yeah, instead of addressing the terrible things, they just give them an app. But what's interesting is that Lyda Hill also was doing something. She's a philanthropist who's in that Pegasus Park, where you and I have talked a lot about what's happening at the Social Impact Hub and the Biotech Hub in Dallas. And Lyda Hill had funded a grant for another mental health program for police officers in the past.
Oh, interesting. Was that the mindfulness? Was it because you guys were doing mindfulness too?
It's mindfulness for the police officers.
Wow. I mean, because it's interesting if you think about like you have civil servants, it's not unlike like veteran, like military people in the military, like you become sort of guinea pigs for a lot of these programs. Yeah. So I was just curious because when we were talking about flow, Adam Neumann is sort of vague about what it actually is, but it's something having to do with rental market housing and creating experiences and community in this housing, and then offering people, instead of an opportunity to actually own where they live, some sort of equity stake in the value that is created in these communities, which could include work from home, school-based programs, health-based programs, cooperatives, like other sorts of things that like are in like purpose-built mixed-use developments. And so I was thinking, like, you've got these apps that are tracking people's mental health status and like what that would look like in a smart environment. And so I pulled a screenshot from this Frontiers in Psychology, because I was just sort of Googling like, smart environment, mental health, tracking or something like that. And at this point, it's mostly about wearables, but it does say that let's see, WSN, wireless sensor networks, which is a lot of what they tested in the WeWork settings, these beacons that they could be used, that they provided opportunities for research and applications to renovate users' psychological experiences during work and education. Monitoring human psychological status with wireless sensor networks can benefit the study of the three-way interactions between humans, machines, and the environment in order to create more efficient and comfortable environments and to improve performance and outcomes in learning and working. So I've been talking a lot lately about like the human computer, right? And and I think in some ways people think of like brain machine interfaces or like the Elon Musk Neuralink or whatever, but they're actually creating computational systems with these wireless sensors and beacons where, and artificial vision cameras where like we become part of the computation, like with machines and with the actual environment. So, I mean, that just seems kind of creepy to me. I don't know about you, Lynn, but like the idea that like I guess what I wanted to mention to you too is that like if they were controlling things, they were talking about smart classrooms and smart work environments, because you spent some time in the past year or so like living in an apartment like that might be one of these sort of new purpose-built community. I mean, yours wasn't a 200 square foot tiny apartment. The way that is the goal is to get people in really, really small footprints and then push them out into public space where they can be watched more or less. But
yeah, it was what I noticed from it normalized this. It really felt like a prison complex in the way that occasionally we were locked in and could not get out. And that was because the technology was always failing. We had key fobs to get into the garage, key fobs that often didn't work. And then when the door locks weren't working, then we couldn't get out. So I thought, wow, what's going to be like in the future when people are in these high density units and they're controlled, even the air. I mean, the air would go off in the middle of the night and you'd have to get up and turn the air on, which, they would control that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I have this paper that I found with a really compelling graphic. I use this in my Tucson talk, but the title of this paper is A Meta User Interface for Interaction with Mixed Reality Environments. And so this image is that there's like a smart studio apartment with sort of a ghost figure with hands, and the hands have strings connected to all the smart items in the apartment. And so that you're literally interacting with, I think you're going to just like mess with you. And it's funny because
that Nasher sculpture,
the
Nasher Art Museum, it looks like that puppet. It wasn't like a puppet, it was that mechanical hand, and it had strings leading to, it was
all the figures.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All the different figures. Yeah, I'll see if I can get that and slip that in.
Of a representation of a giant robotic hand that directs a number of small figures who are composed largely of detritus and dancing to an original score. The concept for the piece began as I was contemplating the rise of artificial intelligence and the possibility of human redundancy. One of the topics of concern at the World Economic Forum over the last few years has been the jobless future. But I think it is not AI as much as the belief in AI that currently threatens us. Although there are many who claim we already have it, some experts think that a true artificial intelligence is not attainable. It's possible we are expecting something that never arrives. In contrast to the futuristic hand, I have included a floating castle of bones. The castle suggests the escapist dreams of superior wealth or a heavenly afterlife, a reason to keep dancing.
So we would be sort of at the service of the machine, right? Like we think they're going to sell it to everybody as convenience, but really we're in the service of the machine, and it's going to give you an experience. And what kind of experience is that? And, my husband and I went to the movies last month, and there was a trailer for a film that was some sort of, action adventure with a cat burglar, like sneaking into a fancy penthouse apartment to steal the artwork. Only the joke was on him because he couldn't get out, and it was a smart apartment that ended up like turning up the heat to 120 degrees and turning off the water and like doing all, so it was like the penthouse apartment, which was unoccupied except for the cat burglar. Like he became trapped within and being manipulated, like his environmental conditions by the apartment.
No, I haven't seen that. I'll stay away from that one.
Yeah, I know it didn't look that appealing to me, like as an overall program. But so this is a couple of slides from John Clippinger. He did a presentation in 2017 on city science. So the city as a science. So again, Dallas, it's one of those key factors in like digital twinning, right? The science of the city. And one of the largest, like the first slide has data for human-centric city design and governance. It has one of these radial charts with the various, indicators on it, right? The data dashboard. And again, like during lockdowns, we've all understood what it's like to live under the control of a data dashboard, like depending on what data is on there. And then it has a skyline and it says a decentralized adaptive network city. Now, decentralized is that's blockchain. Virtualization of everything. So again, I think if you ask most people like, hey, do you want a future where everything is virtualized and you don't actually have control of it? They would say no. And then so John Clippinger is a key figure in developing digital identity for MIT Media Lab. And this is a presentation where he's launching what's called the Token Commons, the Token Commons Foundation. It's an extension of ID3, which is a digital identity program. And what the Tokens Commons Foundation is doing is they're actually managing sustainable energy through something called Switch, which is SWYTCH. Now, I'm not sure the Y is green in the logo, like why it's a Y instead of an I, but it's about sustainable energy, decentralization, dynamic and relational. And they frame it as a generative commons for all. And so like, do you have some thoughts just like based on Dallas and the digital twinning and like the fact that, Institute for the Future is working in North Dallas on their future plans and the resilient city, like all the narratives that kind of come with that?
Yeah, you said it best. You said decentralization is blockchain's sleight of hand, because people they're sold this future of this is going to have all kinds of promise. It'll put you in control of your destiny. And really it's actually the opposite. It's centralizing power and control. And although maybe initially some things will be decentralized, cutting out the middleman, say through your bank, one of those. But this, if you're thinking about your whole life in a dashboard, it's actually centralizing all of your life into one, eventually one central control center, right. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's your twin, right? And that's going to be your digital wallet, because they want all of the data interrelational. And, I think we saw that in the education space with Clever, this idea that the kids were using all these different online learning systems, but what they most wanted to aggregate the data all together and to find patterns in that data. So they would assign like little children QR coded cards to use on their photo on their Chromebooks to log them in to build up their digital identity to figure out where they fit.
Really eager to learn. I usually log them in with their username and password. This is very hard for them because they don't know their letters and they don't know their numbers. How do I expect for them to log in? And typing in their username and password can take between a minute to 5 minutes, just depending on the student. It pretty much all laid back on me for me to log them in. At first, when we met the Clever team and they came and they introduced this new concept, we're crossing our fingers because it's definitely going to change our life and our kids' lives to log into their computers. Clever Badge is a new tool that our TKs are using in the classroom. They get to wear it and then they get to decorate in the back, and then they scan their barcode and are easily logging into their online learning programs. I feel like this is going to be a time saver for me because I will definitely get to use those extra minutes that I have for intervention programs that I run. Even to help the students go on online learning programs. If they have any questions, I feel like I can easily help them more.
So, and when you're talking about Dallas, so I have noticed, I mean, I talk a lot about how the hexagonal symbol for not only cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, but also digital badging for education and their lifelong learner wallet. you'll see this time and time again. Institute for the Future, which you mentioned, has that video about learning is earning, and how the future of work is gig work. And it's not, you won't have a degree and then go into a field, or you'll have a series of competencies and skills that you'll have to do, which I think you're talking about later. But IFTF was in Dallas talking about the reimagining communities, and you'll hear that term a lot, reimagining, reinventing, and education is being reimagined and reinvented for this future of work. And the clever, you're talking about the badges. So you're seeing the lessons being reduced to these badges that they would get in gamification. So you grab for your little badge. So just making that connection there.
Yeah. And a lot of them are actually behavioral, because if they're building a world that probably most people would choose not to want to occupy, like
Yes.
They need to train people to accept it and to like learn what's normal and what the behavioral protocols are. Like if you want to get ahead, these are the soft skills. You need to have that.
Yes. And also with Dallas, I want to make this other point when you mentioned us being a smart city and doing the twinning and all of that, is that Dallas, one of their symbols in their equity report. So they had this report that came out, Dallas, we are being scored for equity. They called our equity scoring, and you'll see that same badge symbol, the Dallas Equity Report. And they have a number of metrics that they're key performance indicators that are being tracked over the years, and that slowly and incrementally leads us to this outcomes-based everything. Everything we do will be scored and tracked. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everything is, the virtualization of everything, and everything is transactional. So I'm going to pull, this is a clip. This is Marc Andreessen. He is with A16Z or Andreessen Horowitz. They're a key player in the Web3 space, the blockchain, fintech, connected internet space. His wife, Laura Auralaga Andreessen, she actually helped set up the field of social impact investing at Stanford. And she was in on the ground floor. Her father became very wealthy in real estate development, interestingly enough, in Silicon Valley, not residential, but commercial real estate. So he's talking here about the wallet spend, and that, like, essentially they're after the big money, and so your biggest expense is your housing, and then education and health. So those are all things that Silicon Valley is after in terms of getting their hooks into that, and that will happen through data analytics. But I would say when he's saying wallet, imagine that as a digital wallet or your digital twin, like that when your spend is really like the resources that are within your control as a digital avatar in this game.
Why is housing important? Why is it particularly relevant? Why is it even part of American dynamism?
Yeah, so there's a critique of Silicon Valley and the tech industry that, on various days, sometimes I agree with, sometimes I don't. But, there's a critique that basically says, look, you guys have done a great job. Silicon Valley's done a great job over the years at like the really unimportant things. And so you've consumer electronics and video games and media and e-commerce, and like, it's all great. It's all fine. It's all good. And by the way, like we do those things. We're very proud of our efforts in those spaces. And we actually think they're very important, but they're small slices of GDP. And then if you look at basically the GDP pie chart, which is also the sort of consumer spending pie chart, the things that people spend money on that really matter in their lives, there's basically three really big ones, right? Healthcare, education, and housing. And if you look at kind of all the economic statistics by sector, healthcare, education, housing are basically increasing, in terms of cost, at a much faster rate than all the others. And they're the sectors where the tech industry has had the least impact historically. And of those, the biggest one is housing.
Interesting. Yeah, he neglects to mention the role of Silicon Valley in defense contracting or finance. Like, it's so, we just do video games and e-commerce.
Right. We weren't led by the military by any means. No way.
No, that's so funny.
Piloted through there first. No.
Well, and I think like what he would say is like, oh, we're going to reduce costs of those things by opening it up and unlocking, the power of efficiencies of the technology. But, to me, it's interesting, the intersection of healthcare, education, and housing is like what I was seeing early on in the education space was this push for the community school model, right? And while we both know that there's tremendous need out there, I don't really trust the Silicon Valley folks to come up with an answer that's actually going to fix the problem. And yet the way that the narrative is set up around community schools, it's very hard to question, or then you become fingers pointed like, oh, you're so hard-hearted, what you want hungry children. But what we're going to be looking at is the imposition of social services and healthcare services into the schools where the data privacy isn't as well, protected through FERPA, or actually they'll probably use the breaking of FERPA to give all the kids a digital identity, and then get that data like in the school system. And, increasingly then if school becomes also in your house, because this is part of like the whole school choice, like they're looking to unbundle school from school buildings. And I didn't really know how they would accomplish that, but that is the goal, is to push the reimagining of education, is that not much of it's actually going to happen in a school building. Now,
and who knew that the most unlikely, it would be that someone like Randy Weingarten with AFT, who would be pushing for this reinventing of schools, and then would also be a cheerleader during the pandemic for
keeping kids out of schools,
keeping them out of school. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and I put that in my most recent article because, both you and I have been, strong advocates for neighborhood schools, like public education. Now, in hindsight, I understand it was a more complex dynamic going on. And like really the forces of AI and data mining are coming after the kids, no matter where they're being trained, educated, conditioned, like whether that's in private, parochial, homeschool, public school, charter school. Like they wanted us to actually pick a side and then understand all the other ones as the enemy. And like I've kind of expanded my view, because I said, actually, at public schools, what they're about is to train kids to accept this future where everything is virtualized. Like I can't actually, like, I don't think any educational choice and any of those choices are going to be acceptable until we actually deal with the problem, that is the core problem for me.
Yeah. And I think also too, when looking at maybe intentionally breaking a system, or bringing in the problem and then suggesting the solution. I think when you look at education, and different states do it differently, but in Texas, that your property taxes fund the schools. And so those are getting to the point, because of the bond debt and just the cost of education, those are our property values and rents are getting to the point where they're not sustainable. We can't afford them. And we're, the affordable housing issue, affordable and low income housing issue is increasing. So, some of that ties back to education because of what we do spend. And you and I know a lot of that is spent on new shiny buildings, but also the technology, which is feeding this future that is not good for the kids, but that's where we're being nudged into the metaverse. And
it's interesting what you were saying about the taxes and the bonds and the affordable housing, because I think actually the plan to move people into this renter economy, maybe with a UBI subsidy, is actually like crazy housing prices is part of that. Like it's sort of like you need to create the problem to offer the solution. So you need to actually work on making everything unaffordable in order to usher in the next phase.
And even like teacher residencies, which will feed into the housing issue, because, oh, look, it's so convenient. But when you live and work and you're owned by that space, then you really have no freedom in your ability to get out of it if you can't afford to live anywhere else or do it without their support from the government, or however this is going to be set up. That will be, it's another issue within this.
Exactly. So this is just a slide that touches on green light and the credential part. And, we've talked about this in other conversations, but like the competency based education program, they want to essentially, this is part of the cradle to career pipeline, right? That commit and Strive Together are working on. It goes right through, early start college, where they have high school kids, going to community college and getting their blockchain transcript, and then moving on to, you know, and a lot of them won't go to four-year college because that's going to be unattainable. And then honestly, if it's mostly online, people just aren't even going to want to pay for it anymore. So you'll go into some sort of apprenticeship program, or, you know, talent acquisition this is one of the pages on Greenlight, reducing the talent acquisition timeline, right? Like, because we all need to hurry up and like hire 19-year-olds to code the metaverse, you know, which is sort of, you know, where it's going. But to me, that's the wallet. When he talks about a wallet spend, there's a young woman leaning up against a locker and it says, "What's in your digital locker?" Well, your digital locker is your digital wallet.
Greenlight calls it a life locker, which I think is interesting. And so in talking about the decentralization, it's actually with a for-profit company who got this sweet deal, which is Greenlight. And they got it in Dallas ISD to be scaled not only statewide, but also nationwide, because I found the document about blockchain in the Department of Ed, and they cited Greenlight and what's happening at Dallas ISD and Dallas College. But that life locker, so you picture, it may seem inconvenient to have all these silos in your life, like your bank here and your school here and your mental health or your healthcare here. But with Greenlight, it's actually putting all of that into one convenient life locker, but thinking about the enormous power of one entity holding all of that on a person, every aspect of their life, pretty much, including their physical fitness. That, I mean, we need to examine potential problems with that, which the school districts aren't doing, and there's no informed consent. And they also uploaded all the people who've gone to Dallas College since the 60s onto this Greenlight locker, which there was no informed consent. I found an old article.
That's a huge data set.
It is, yes, all of those people. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
They don't know about it. In fact, I thought about, my husband went to Dallas College for some prerequisite courses. I thought about seeing what I could pull for an open records request and see what, you know, his Greenlight locker or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
The records that are done. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, before, like, so I mentioned I had a few of those slides from John Clippinger about virtualize everything. Now, he worked with Sandy Pentland at the MIT Media Lab, and they were doing social physics. And in 2013, they were doing early research into the creation of a personal data store platform, and it was called Open Mustard Seed, which, you know, Lynn, can you speak to do you know the verse, or do you know like the idea of the mustard seed?
I'm bad about
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you're like my go-to for.
We're supposed to have the faith of a mustard seed because of it's teeny tiny and the growth. Yeah, I'll look that up while you're talking.
Okay, so that's a very evocative name that they gave it to computer geeks, right? Like, it's not a typical.
That's also in Matthew, the same book, the Gospels. Okay, he replied, "Because you have so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you."
Yeah. And, you know, honestly, some of this stuff, it feels a bit like, now I'm not saying that that's metaphysical, like that's faith for sure, but like I feel like they're trying to tap into some of these more like things that are beyond the material, shall we say, like there, and that's sort of evocative of that. So John Clippinger helped develop something called the Institute for Institutional Innovation and Data-Driven Design. So it's called ID3, but Institute for Institutional Innovation and Data-Driven Design. So that was helping sort of launch, that was in 2010, this platform. And then eventually they were really working on the digital identity space. And it was sort of in contrast to the NIST trusted identities in cyberspace, because they wanted something that was open source and not proprietary. So they felt that NIST was working on something that would end up being more locked in, and they wanted an open source solution. Then eventually that pivoted and it became something called the Token Commons Foundation. Now, for about 10 years, that project was based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where MIT is. But then in 2019, it actually relocated to Austin. So I'm going to go. And one of the board members of ID3, working with Clippinger, is this guy. His name is Irving Wladowski Berger, and Wladowski, Wladawsky, Irving Wladowski Berger, who essentially he worked at IBM for 37 years. And he developed very high level programs there, including working on internet development, supercomputing, and Linux. And now he is a research affiliate at MIT in the Sloan School of Management and Cybersecurity, and also a fellow that involved in the initiative on the digital economy, on connection science, and then he's part of the Stanford Digital Economy Lab. So this is a very highly placed guy. In addition, since he's retired, he's worked on innovations advising for Citigroup and MasterCard, which is very central to all of this. And he used to be a member of the Board of Governors for Argonne National Labs and the Board of Overseers for Fermi Lab and the Technology Advisory Council for British Petroleum. So pretty connected guy. So I'm just saying, like, you know, later on, we'll talk a little bit about IBM and their involvement in the education space, but like they're part of all of the cybernetics that are going on. So yeah, so the next thing. So I have P-Tech, which is IBM's essentially trying to like insert itself into the high school and early college experience to groom a workforce to build, to, you know, to do what IBM needs the young people to do, which is build the metaverse and build out Web3. But so this slide is just something I pulled from the IBM website, but it was a YouTube, an hour-long discussion of P-Tech, which is their educational aligned program, and internships, because a lot of the competency-based learning is work-based. They're like not emphasizing like a broad education and really giving kids a narrow focus right into a workforce program. And it's about
pathways. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pathways to technology, and it's essentially it's slotting them for this future workforce. But you know, when I ran for a seat on Dallas College, there was a guy who called himself the father of P-Tech, and he was rabid on me. He didn't want me to win that seat. And he was not only an IBM employee in the past, but also working with Greenlight. And then now he's got a job at Dallas ISD. So I found that interesting. So membership into this club has its rewards. You get jobs, and as long as you champion their initiatives. But there's not a real concern with the kids having actual math skills, which I find interesting. Because I'd get frustrated with this STEM focus that, well, within that is science, technology, engineering, and math, but they weren't really concerned about really foundational skills in math. So it was really more of a technology focus, not so much. Right. So they skip over that so that they can train them for these jobs of the future.
Right. And one of the, like part of the presentation there was the stimuli. It says, you know, stimuli was part of that. So can you speak a little bit just to what stimuli is?
Yeah, Stimuli is a game. It's a school within a video game. And that's a quote from the founder, Taylor Shedd, who used to work at the Apple store. And now she's suddenly this big time champion and founder of this product, or this model for education. They took over a school in Dallas ISD, which is this nice historical building. And so the kids go 2 days a week, they're in person in school. It's a metaverse campus, a metaverse school. And then the other 3 days, they're at home on their device, and they're moving through this virtual schooling. And so they're given an avatar, and Allison's got this creepy screenshot of the eyeball that follows them through
through the game, just to make sure that you know that you're being watched.
Right. And then on the wall of some of these virtual classrooms, you'll see these corporate logos like IBM or Apple, and so it's grooming the kids to think in terms of going to work someday. And you know, as somebody, you know, you and I have talked about this, as someone who's worked with unemployed people, volunteered with them for 12 years, I'm deeply concerned about people finding gainful employment and having meaningful work. So, you know, not to come off as insensitive to that, but the purpose of education is now shifting more to a workforce model, but for training the kids without giving them the foundation that we all kind of take for granted. And then when that particular job, if it's eliminated or they're replaced by, you know, a robot or whatever, then that leaves them with very little to fall back on in terms of education. So that's one of the concerns.
that'll hold the very first of its kind hybrid school, mixing online with in-person learning, reimagining what the traditional school day looks like.
Technology is changing the way we work, the way we play, and even the way we midnight snack. But what about education?
So our platform connects students to their future through providing them with virtual mentorship, digital resumes and portfolios, and a video library of over thousands of videos where industry partner employees are talking about the important skills for them to be successful in their career. So students can upload their resumes, their portfolios, and the mentors can provide feedback on that.
4th, 5th, and 6th grade.
Taylor Sheed is the founder of Stimuli, the creators behind this new virtual world students will be attending school in.
It's a video game. It's a school and a video game.
One login, a simple dashboard.
On Google Chrome, type in stimuli.net. Once you've arrived to our homepage, go to Student Sign In. At the bottom, select Dallas Independent School District. Now, go ahead and log in with Clever, and then select Login with Google, and here enter your student email address.
When your child first logs in, they will select a custom avatar. Over time, they will learn and collaborate in an open sandbox world with their friends.
Stimuli is a connected schoolhouse for a connected world and easy access to your teacher.
Right here in Dallas ISD.
It's disposable. It's creating sort of disposable labor, because the next skill you get, they'll be creating betting markets on you, reskilling you for the next job, because that's that's part of the human capital betting project. And I would say also, like, I don't think it's the Stimuli school that's opened is for the younger kids, but I know, at least in the way they were promoting it for high school kids, that this idea that you would have mentors, like corporate mentors and online onboarding, and, but it didn't actually really work out, like, because most corporate people don't have time to like sit around and shepherd a bunch of high school kids, through some sort of performative, like, work-based learning project. So there was a mentorship component that I think is coming, and I can foresee in the future, like, some sort of school cooperative where, people have access to on-demand mentors in different topics. And then you get your micro payments based on like how you mentor kids. It's not going to be the IBM executive taking time out of their work to mentor these kids. It's going to be, you're going to have these pop-up mentorships. So this is
very little substance behind them.
You don't learn anything. You're not really learning, and you're not learning in community. Like, you're learning in a video game. So that's not the same as actually working through relationships. So this is taken from the 990. These are the annual tax documents. This is for the Token Commons Foundation. So Clippinger, the ID3 program that was working on digital identity, pivoted in 2018. And it says, let's see. Oh, actually, it changed its name in 2017, December 2017, to the Token Commons Foundation. The organization further defined its mission to focus on the development of switch technology, SWYTCH. The mission is to build a more sustainable and equitable future through the creation of a commons-based blockchain protocol. And then it goes on to say that it should enable autonomy and self-determination and encourage cooperation and inclusion. And it will be open source, and it will aggregate data from devices, individuals, and entities in the network. It will give you a self-sovereign identity. It will operate through smart contracts, trust tokens, and value tokens that incentivize innovation, facilitate exchange, and promote integrity. Quote, through the spirit of the commons, we will work together to capture the collective potential of our global community. So yeah, they landed in Austin in 2019. So it kind of tells you, can you say a little bit, Lynn, about like the goings on with blockchain in Dallas? Because what they're after here in this is, sovereignty, autonomy, innovation, entrepreneurship. Like, they're very much like dog whistling to the sort of more conservative, less government, free market economics program.
Absolutely. And so what they'll say is, you'll own your own data, and it'll give you peer-to-peer access to or a peer-to-peer sharing, whether it's currency or your information. I know with the Greenlight deal, they took the big story. There's always a little the story behind the agenda, but they said they had this problem, and so in order to solve the fact that people didn't have access to their transcripts, they wanted to make a convenient tool, so they partnered with Greenlight so they take a legitimate problem, which who wouldn't agree? I mean, yeah, it's a pain. If you had to go get your transcript, where would you even start? Yours and mine would be in some dusty vault in our high school, but and then getting one from our college, that you go through the registrar. So the idea is that it cuts out the middleman. You would have access. You would own your own information. But I mean, as far as the you talking about the blockchain, just
the government, like Texas, they're trying to set Texas up to be sort of a test bed of a lot of the blockchain governments as like the economy, right? To build the economy on the new blockchain crypto. I mean,
yes, and we want to our governor wants to be the leader in blockchain technology. He signed a couple of bills to study this. And but what we're trying to tell him is that it's already here in education. It's being piloted in order to scale it nationwide. And we do see the intersection. It will come to the currency as we move to this tokenized economy that they're trying to push on us. And education is a huge piece of that, as you've helped me understand. And the same people that are pushing this, the blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and all of that, are also the ones who are promoting the voucher, and taking your money and letting the money in your digital wallet or your education wallet follow the child.
Because you become the token, like in the game, you become like the playable token, really.
Yes, and the libertarians, they, as you mentioned, they love that because they want less government, more self-regulation and control. But they don't understand that they're setting up for this economy that is there's
it's cybernetics, like it's yeah. And I will just point out, so it's talking about sustainability and equity, and the thing is called switch. Now we have to understand this as like cybernetics and electrical engineering and circuits. So what they're after is some sort of balance, like a homeostasis. This is like this idea of the earth as a, spaceship, limited closed system, and that they're flipping the switches to like, I don't know, they turned off your air conditioner in the middle of the night because somebody flipped the switch and said like, we got to redirect, that into something else to keep the balance. Like there's all of these switches that are connected to these sensor networks that are going to be shaping our lives. And so to me, it's very interesting that they actually called it switch. So this is the 990 for 2019. It has the Austin address, which I think it's interesting because it's San Marcos Street. Now, did you say the mustard seed, was that in Mark?
Matthew, but some of them,
Matthew, okay.
Sometimes you'll see the same verse in the other gospels, depending, and just said a little differently.
Yeah. But so I think it is San Marcos Street is interesting.
Yeah, but I'll look that up while you're talking.
And so so I wasn't sure because sometimes it's hard to sort of suss out these blockchain Web3 programs, like which are the ones with bigger backing and which are the ones that are just pop-ups that aren't going to last. And sometimes they change names. But there's a white paper from the Switch community, this guy, Dwight Spruill, and they're talking about building functionality that they're working to get tokens to trade for energy efficiency upgrades, water pumps, heating elements, and servers. But they also wanted to use the token to be able to barter or trade goods inside the ecosystem. And then they said, oh, that was an overreach because then we would actually be regulated by the SEC. And we can't do that. Like we can't actually be a payment system, even though we wrote it in our white paper. So we take it back. But they're thinking that they're going to actually link the idea. Now here, this is about hardware, right? Like we're installing stuff in your home to make you more energy efficient. But the idea that you're going to get a bunch of tokens that are going to be used for barter, that doesn't really make sense. Like, oh, I put in a heat pump. I don't need another one for 10 years, but like, I'm going to get a few tokens. And I'm like, no, this is going to somehow be linked to our behaviors. And that's a lot of what Leo and I just talked about, like the sustainability, how your behavior interfaces with the metrics for the Sustainable Development Goals and using that as a barter type community inclusion currency. So, I mean, I think the fact that these guys moved to Austin from being in Cambridge for 10 years, to me, is a major signal that Texas is being set up for this. Now, one of the co-founders of the Token Commons Foundation and this Switch program, his name is Evan Caron, Caron. He's based in Austin, and he is 15 years in energy and commodity markets trading. So, and he was connected to something called Trailstone Strategic Partnerships, investing in shared goal in sustainable energy, like tokenizing sustainable energy. So can you say a few things a little bit, like what we've realized in the education space, especially in Texas, is like we would bump up against hedge funds, and then we would bump up against futures oil traders, like futures energy traders, like maybe a little bit about John Arnold and like the smart guys.
Yeah. Well, I keep running up against him in interesting sort of ways, because John Arnold, he grew up in Dallas ISD, not too far from me. And then he made his money through the whole Enron scandal. He cashed out just before the major explosion of that scandal. And so the energy, it's interesting because you and I have seen this potential for us and our children to be the energy sources. And so it does make you wonder. And we've seen movies that have kind of alluded to that run on us, our bodies. But Arnold also was involved in the takeover. They tried to take over Dallas ISD through this home rule charter thing. And he worked with the then trustee, Mike Morath. And Mike Morath is the TEA commissioner for our education agency now. But Arnold keeps, he keeps popping up as a funder of the education portfolio model of privatization. He keeps popping up in healthcare, reimagining healthcare. He's in recidivism and some of the prison reform stuff. And then he even bought a spy plane in Baltimore. So, I mean, he's
based in Houston, right? The Arnold.
Yes, now he's in Houston. And even with, we're bumping up against these lobbyists at the legislature right now. And some of them have ties to him. So yeah, there's still, he's better at hiding his involvement. He started, so he had Laura and John Arnold Foundation, and then started the Arnold Venture, so that there could be, I think that when you move to an LLC, there's less transparency on where the money's going from a political standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that, for me, the smartest guys in the room, that documentary, was this idea that in the California energy markets, like because of the way the policy was set up, they actually were able to like send energy outside of the state during like times in like heat waves and things like that. And then bring it back in and make more money. Like they actually weren't doing things efficiently to make a most optimized system. Actually, they were kind of wrecking the system so that they could benefit from wrecking it and then make more money off of it. And they all knew what they were doing. And so this idea that like he's integrated with the Pay for Success finance programs in the CIPRA, Social Impact Partnerships Pay for Results. And he has, I'm pretty sure, like a program, they were backing a program at Georgetown about all the impact finance, but like that you can, if you can make a lot of money by breaking things, and then soon the things that you're breaking are like the most vulnerable people in the community or nature or systems, like it's really overwhelming. So,
and hours poring over the new rules for the deregulation of California's energy industry, looking for loopholes that Enron could exploit to make money.
He found plenty. After the bankruptcy, a confidential memo surfaced revealing the names of Belden's strategies to game the California market. Wheel Out, Get Shorty, Fat Boy. Recently, audio tapes of the Enron traders were discovered.
What do you want to call this project? I had to catch a name for that. How about, something friendly like Death Star?
The tapes revealed Enron's contempt for any values except one, making money.
Hey, John. And the regulatory is all in a big concern about is we're wheeling power out of California. He just steals money from California to the tune of $1 million. Can we rephrase that? Okay. He arbitrages the California market to the tune of $1 million or $2 a day.
An arbitrage opportunity has been defined to me as any opportunity to make abnormal profit. So an abnormal profit would be returns above and beyond the norm. I was told that a good trader is a creative trader, and a creative trader is a trader that can find arbitrage opportunities.
One of those opportunities was called Ricochet.
I'll see you guys. I'm taking mine to the desert.
In the midst of the energy shortages, Enron traders started to export power out of the state. When prices soared, they brought it back in.
So we fucking export like a motherfucker. You getting rich. Trying to.
Well, and also in thinking of in terms of gaming and gambling and those markets. So if you look at Enron and trading on weather and energy futures, that I think is an interesting piece, because the gambling, you've done videos on gambling on our futures, our children, and being able to hedge bets on that. That I think is significant too.
Yeah. And Leo and I, we were just talking about insurance, the role of the insurance industries in the environmental stuff in this parametric insurance. But, I was like, in agricultural commodities trading, and I'm like, well, but we know that there's geoengineering. So within certain things, if you know, if you can control the betting and then you can control the environmental conditions, like that's a rigged game, right?
The tornadoes. Yeah. Wow. We predicted there's going to be a really bad, here. Yeah. And
it's crazy that we even have to say this, but who knew that all the things we were going to find out, when we started looking. So this was a 2019 Medium post by this guy, Dwight Spruill, but he's talking about how they're really expanding their business model for Switch. And that this guy, Evan, he was the involved with the Token Commons Foundation, that Evan visited Japan to drum up business and talk to potential partners, while Troy hit up Houston, home to almost every major energy player in the world. So I have a feeling that the energy, I think we all realize that after the pandemic shoe dropped, the next shoe to drop will be the climate stuff. And, I think that there's maybe some people on the left or the progressives who imagine the big oil, we're going to fight big oil and we're going to do it sustainably, only they're not fully realizing that it's the same people who are involved in the sustainability movement, right? Oh no, the oil company started the sustainability movement, right? So I feel like Texas as the oil state, right? And I guess I didn't really think about Houston in that way, but that's really key in the decarbonization.
Right.
Yeah.
I know it is interesting. And yeah, Texas is, it continues to pop up as a problem.
It is. So this
you were born.
I know, right? I was born in Fort Worth. This is my destiny. Tell the story. So this is the slide I showed with Leo early on, but as I was putting all this stuff together today with Switch, and again, thinking about the fact that they're going to integrate in mixed use developments like education and healthcare and work and housing and smart it all up. That really the origins of this go back to this technocracy movement, which started out with Charles Proteus Steinmetz, who was a brilliant electrical engineer working for GE. He actually got GE to develop its own research lab in Schenectady, New York in the early 20th century. And then he went on to become part of the technocracy movement and then do this energy survey in North America. And so at the time, and this is maybe the 1920s, they were already proposing an energy currency. Now, this work in assessing all the energy was linked to Columbia University. And the key technocracy guy in all of this was Howard Scott. And he was working out of the Industrial Engineering School at Columbia, but he was colleagues with this guy, M. King Hubbert. Now, M. King Hubbert was a petroleum engineer who was educated at Columbia, and he was from Texas, and he developed the peak oil theory. So that was 1956. So you can't really run an energy economy, you have to control how we understand the power systems. And so again, the peak oil narrative, along with, the climate change, how all of that, like, that's what actually drives the cybernetic system. Like, we can't just do all the things. Like, we need to actually have everything under a sensor-based control, or we're going to exceed capacity. And so I thought it was interesting that, like, M. King Hubbard, I think, I'm trying to remember exactly where he was. I know he grew up in Texas. Born in 1903, he spent his early years on a farm in the dusty plains of the San Saba County, Texas. I don't know where San Saba County is, but that's that was him. So again, Texas is sort of key. And then Switch, they did a funding round. This is in 2018. And you might think again, like, oh, maybe Switch is just one of these little companies, not a big company, right? But it turns out when they did their funding round, among the people who were advising them included Galila Benartzi, who was with Bancor, and Steve Jurvetson with Tesla and Solar City. And so Galila Benartzi with Bancor is actually really important. And she was talking about, she was so excited about using these tokens to support great teams utilizing blockchain to solve problems. Now, I made another map about Bancor, and what Bancor did was it was providing liquidity, because again, you need the tokens to be able to move through the ecosystem. Like if you have a whole wallet full of a certain kind of token, but you want to buy something you can only buy with a Y token, then you need some way of changing them out. And that's what Bancor was doing. So what's really interesting is Galila Benartzi, she was a founder of Bancor. She was working with this guy, let's see. So one of her first projects was something called the Lev Market. So essentially it was like in Israel for moms to do like a co-op, like a babysitting co-op, only it was on blockchain, and it was called Hearts. So you would trade things. Let me see. It says, is community crypto the future of money? And she's talking about, the article talks about Galila Benartzi, co-founder of the blockchain trading platform Bancor, told the story of the Lev Market, an experimental program in Israel. Bancor issued levs, or hearts in Hebrew. So we're back to the hearts again, to 20,000 mothers who used the currency to pay one another for services like babysitting, school pickups, and baking. Wow. So they got 20,000 moms trading hearts to get on the blockchain. But so this is what Galila, this is sort of her backstory. Now, another one of her colleagues was Ari Ben David, who was involved in Israeli monetary reform and community currencies. And he was the key contact in Jerusalem for the Anthroposophical Society, which is the Rudolf Steiner stuff. Mm. So you've got the Waldorf anthroposophical stuff. You've got Mother's community currency. And then Galila Benartzi and B Protocol hosted a community visioning summit in 2019 at Bretton Woods. Now, Bretton Woods is where they created the World Bank and the IMF back in the post-war era. Mm-hmm. The keynote speaker was this woman, Rianne Eisler, who is a Viennese futurist interested in systems engineering. And she was actually had an affiliation with the Center for Partnership Studies and did a course that was connected to the Omega Institute in the 70s. And that was Teilhard Desjardins. So I know this is a bit roundabout, but like Rianne Eisler and through the Center for Partnership Studies, the Omega Institute is promoting the noosphere, promoting this global brain ascension program. And so, Galila Benartzi and Bancor is indirectly connected to that through Rianne Eisler. It turns out Adam Neumann's wife, Rebecca, who was always portrayed as sort of loopy, woo-woo, loopy-doopy kind of stuff. And she was like played off as like, can you believe Rebecca is showing up and being all goofy, cuckoo stuff here? And like, look, she put this stuff about like we and energy and stuff into our, IPO language, and look, it made us look stupid. Well, Rebecca got her yoga training at this same center, the Omega Institute in Reinhardt, New York. And like, so there is this whole collective consciousness ascension thing going on, but it's directly linked to the financial technologies.
So the noosphere, what's the root of that? Do you know
Well, essentially, so there were two people who were talking about it around the same time. One was a Russian I think he was a geologist, Vladimir Vernadsky, and he was a biogeochemist. And then the other one was Talar Desjardins, who was a Jesuit priest who was also interested in geology. And he was in China for a lot of the time. And he was part of the team that discovered the Peking man. And what they were both saying is that human evolution isn't over, and that we are supposed to evolve, sort of dematerialize into a global thought form. Like we are supposed to sort of dematerialize and become part of this hive mind consciousness. And Teilhard de Chardin, he was Jesuit. Now, because he was advancing evolution, he was kind of pushed out of the Catholic Church because they're like, we don't do that. So, but he was blending evolution with Catholic faith and saying, when we reach that point, it will be the Omega point, which is the name of the institute. This will be Christogenesis. And it's sort of like, I guess it's the self, ego death and into this like unity layer,
Okay.
So they're steering it all through the digital currency, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And the B protocol people are part of like this whole thing with the digital identity and the cryptocurrency stuff. So I'm just going to play this little clip. So this is touching on Jamie Dimon, all right? And so I put in on this slide too, the Dallas County Promise, and the Jamie Dimon shows up in Dallas to like check out his investment in the human capital. Lynn, do you want to say a few words about Dallas County Promise?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, my son, when he was 17, he was a senior in high school, and they forced him to sign this promise. And he wasn't even going to the junior college. He'd already signed up to go to another school, but we figured out it's a big data grab. And so that they can have all the seniors who are graduating in the Metroplex sign this pledge, they have major access. And it gives them, what they pitch it as is financial aid. So they'll help you with FAFSA and FAFSA. And through the Jamie Dimon is a big investor of the Commit Partnership, who is behind this promise. And so it's interesting because when I've watched some of the things that I think it's clips that you've had of Jamie Dimon talking, he can be pretty brazen when he's being interviewed. He has strong opinions, but they contradict what he's actually doing with his investments, which is interesting.
Yeah. So in the Dallas County Promise is part of the green light, right? Or was it not?
Yeah, so Dallas County Promise is tied to Greenlight, and the Commit Partnership, the Goldman guy who started Commit, he's the one that actually chose Greenlight, even though he's not elected. He runs a nonprofit, but he chose Greenlight to be the provider of these blockchain wallets. Yeah, I mean.
All right, so here, let's listen.
JP Morgan leads a large investment in WeWork.
Adam loved to name drop to people. And I mean, Jamie Dimon is the world's top banker, and he would tell people he was his personal banker.
Yeah, personal banker. So there are some bets to be made as long as we can get everybody with their interoperable data cards, right? And to invest in them as human capital, right? And so we've had
the Texas data sets. That I think is the piece where JP Morgan keeps focusing on Dallas, because I think they have had the most successful collective impact model in accessing the kids and through this whole workforce. Digital skilling, reskilling, all of it there's something to it and why he's looking at Dallas so closely.
Well, and you've always said that like Texas has the most biggest data sets of data mineable kids over time, because a lot of that was based out of UT Austin, like the big supercomputing data sets for education.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you and I, we've had like a nice chat about Learn Card before, and sort of the struggles in the school choice, and this idea that people are going to get out of, get one over on the government and take their money and go somewhere. But like eventually it's all going to be tracked on Learn Card with your, QR codes and linking your, passports and your mobility to your jobs and your badges and your credentials and your money. Like they want it all integrated.
Oh, can I say something that you reminded me of something? So the governor of Texas, Abbott, either last week or the week before, he did a big state of the state. Normally he does it at the Capitol, but he did it in a corporation, which is unprecedented. And it was in San Marcos, and it's a magnet company. Anyway, I can't think of the name, but they don't do that, but they made everyone sign up in advance. They had to leave their phones in their cars, sign a non-disclosure, but it's this, they do magnet, it's earth magnets. It's an earth magnets company in San Marcos. So thought that was significant in terms of the polarization that this school choice thing brings, because you have those every legislative session, which right now in most states, they're fighting this voucher thing. But in Texas, our session is going on right now. We'll go into special sessions until they get this thing passed. So it's hot right now, and this Learn card will totally tie into this.
Yeah. And I mean, at this point, the Learning Economy Foundation is focused on Colorado and Broward, and it just seems kind of like it's putzing along, but like it's linked to the World Bank Education Task Force. So it feels like it's going to come on eventually in some big way. So in addition to WeWork, there were two other enterprises. One was We Grow, which was the school, and another was We Live. So Rebecca's project was We Grow, which was the school, and it was featuring conscious entrepreneurship and yoga and mind expanding programs. So, you know, we can see where all of that fits in. Again, like the entrepreneurship is the agency and the game. Now, this was an elite private school. I think it was like 40,000 a pop, you know, in New York City, and it had no track record. And like, I think it only lasted a year, but you know, it shows the interest in the education space. And this was supposed to be sort of a setup, like, look how dumb they are getting into education. Like, you should be focusing on your business model. And this is the mainstream media, but they're not actually understanding that education is the primary business model. Like, that's actually what's coming next. Like, they want the data for the AI. And so they kind of collapsed We Grow. WeWork still exists. We Grow collapsed, but she and Adam are doing a new school program. And again, this is building off of this idea of unschooling and microschooling that took hold so much during the lockdowns. And it's actually called Soulful. Now, the acronym is SOLFL, but what is it called? Soulful, Student of Life for Life. So this is the lifelong learners, but they want your soul. And so, you know, there's not much to it at this point. They're like, you could sign up for their newsletter and get some information, but they're building up like essentially what's going to be coming with like a hybrid micro school model, especially like that has a crunchy, like new agey, but also entrepreneurial. Cause like, I think they kind of want both sides. Like, they want the business side, like they want to appeal to the business people, but then they also want to appeal to like, you can be a good person sort of thing. And I was talking with somebody just yesterday, and she was telling me that Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, that he talked about that mindfulness, that transcendental meditation was like the biggest part, the most important thing in his life. You know, the big hedge fund trader was transcendental meditation. So there's something about like getting us in an altered state, like training the children to be accepting of an altered state of consciousness as like an entrepreneurial piece. And what this brings to mind to me, all of these like test beds for non-public custom education that are definitely like targeting the upwardly professional families who are dissatisfied with the system that is like broken on purpose. Like, I think we can both agree, like the stuff is not perfect in public schools, and it's not perfect for a reason, because they want to shut you into these things, is this Acton Academy, which
when I was in Dripping Springs 2 days ago, we spoke there, my friend and I, and it was the woman who connected because of you and watching our videos. She connected with me through Facebook, knowing I was in Texas. And so I said, hey, we'll come out there and speak. And we did a whole presentation, but she had put her son in Acton Academy. And then she saw your video. She's like, dang it. So she came from California and, a whole medical freedom movement. She's like, Texas. She was from the left, and then was like, wait, what is all this imposition on our medical decisions? And so she's like researching Texas, finds Dripping Springs. She's like, all right, this is my place. And then finds it. It's not an escape. And then Acton, and she has a place for her son, and then that's not going to work either. Yeah, it's very frustrating because it looks, I mean, look at that.
Looks so good. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah. So again, it's all centered on the hero's journey and this idea of being a curious, lifelong learner, a respect for economic, political, and religious freedom, cherishing the arts, doing all this discovery. But in reality, and you can go to my blog, I have a sort of an open letter by a parent who was in communication directly with the founders of this. Now they don't call it actually a franchise; it's something else. But the people who developed the concept, and they actually are connected to the guy who was doing the business development end of it was a former Goldman Sachs who studied under Clayton Christensen and is a member of the LDS Church. So it's quite, you've got push all the buttons there. But again, they have a really good brand. But then when you get into it, it involves a lot of like online, like learning and social emotional data mining and like, conditioning. But they're like, no, we're not doing the China capital, like the Chinese social credit scoring. No, we're not doing that. We're not like China. We're good capitalists. Like that's what the guy was saying. He's like, no, we're good we're not doing the China. But what people are not getting is that it's about the ant computer game and the betting on it that Jamie Dimon's about. So the guy, it was Jeff and Laura Sandifer who developed the Acton Academy model. Now here's his bio. Like, do you know the Texas Public Policy Foundation? Is that ring a bell?
We run into them all the time because their policy, we call them stink tanks, but the policy wonks, they're always at the Capitol and they can kind of dance around the political the parties, and they can kind of be, oh no, we're kind of somewhere in the middle, and there are libertarian elements to what they're doing, but for the most part people perceive them to be on the right. They're big proponents of school choice. They've hosted things with Jeb Bush and doing the whole voucher schemes. So yes, they're major players in Texas politics.
Yeah. And the thing about Jeff Sandifer was he was involved in like offshore, I think it was like mostly offshore oil drilling, like energy futures trading. Like when I say we keep bumping into the energy people, the oil people, that's them. And then he taught at UT Austin for a while, but he was more of an iconoclast. And then he eventually developed his own MBA program that was done in partnership with Jordan Peterson, at least for a time. And so, I have a map. There's a lot of Acton academies in Texas, but they're also international. And they describe, this is from their website, we are not a franchise, but a network of entrepreneurial parents bound by the principles of freedom, responsibility, hard work, and ultimate belief in the human genius within each child. So you can see
like a genius kid,
Yeah. Well, you want to, it's entrepreneurs and it's, freedom, responsibility, and hard work. So this is definitely like sort of the Protestant work ethic framing. But again, I don't think that Jeff and the people behind Acton Academies are really being honest about the future that's being built for children or what it's going to look like to be an entrepreneur in the data economy.
So tell me, so is he on the board of TPPF? What's his connection?
I think he's, you know what? I have to look it up. It's on their website. So I'm assuming it means board because I don't think he's staff, unless he's just an affiliate somehow that's a non-board affiliate.
Could be a major funder. I need to go back. I remember we talked about this, but I had forgotten the TPPF connection. Yeah.
Yeah. So this slide has a picture of my guest post. It's this open letter, our Acton Academy experience, surveillance incentives, behaviorism, freedom levels, and ed tech. And then this is from our Pegasus Park map that I made. And essentially, so Jeff's father, I think Jackie, does it say Jackie Sandifer? He was a wildcatter oil guy. And they were working in offshore oil drilling. And then he had this energy investment company that he later sold. He is working on Acton Academy, the concept with his wife, Laura, and it's all about like the hero's journey. And they rely a lot on technology. They have a limited staff. It's sort of framed as like Montessori light a little bit, a lot of blended learning, a self-directed project base. So that goes along with the competency model. And like it's really pushing this idea of the low-cost private school, like the low-cost private school model is what's going to be coming up next with badges and transcripts. Now, the thing about Jeff is he was a member of like very conservative, the Mont Pelerin Society, the National Review, Philanthropy Roundtable. Let's see. Oh, he was on the board, Texas Public Policy Foundation. So yeah, it says he was a board member. He was on the, I'm not sure. He had ties to Harvard Business School. It says board. I don't know if he was a board member of Harvard. Maybe that's something else. And then, so his grandfather was with this Hardin Simmons University in Abilene. So that was like their big family link. Is that a Baptist university? Do you know? I don't know if you remember.
Simmons, I don't think so.
Okay.
Actually don't know. I don't know.
That was kind of a big thing of his backstory, that his grandfather, and his grandfather's actually buried on the campus, and it's a big deal. But the Acton is named after Lord Acton, and the Acton Institute, he's affiliated with that, and it's all about free market and limited government. So,
once the wildcatter thing, because now we have the health wildcatters that are in Pegasus Park, and so when you think about wildcatters in oil, now think about that from a digging,
deposits.
Yeah.
Well, like it seems like Dallas, because Dallas, the other thing about impact finance is that they target English language learners, low-income kids, and you want them in a concentrated location. So, it strikes me that, again, we've talked about both California and Texas have some of the largest populations of children, and especially also low-income children and children who fit that profile. Mm-hmm. So like they want to go to a place that they can tap into I guess the data analysts are like the new geophysicists, right? It's like figure out where you can go to get the most data.
Yeah. And you just see that some of the same old oil families now, they're really heavily involved in the school privatization movement, which is interesting. And then, Midland and John Arnold. Also, I thought of something too, while we were talking, is that Houston right now, they're about to take over. The state is about to take over Houston ISD. Of course, it's, they always target Black and brown communities for this. They don't take over, white schools or white districts. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of, if that triggers this whole tokenized economy, because what are they going to do with this corporate takeover of the schools? And some of the same people who've been pushing for this in Dallas are tied to this, this learning economy.
Yeah. So this is just an image of Laura Andreessen, like her LinkedIn profile. Again, she's married to Marc Andreessen, who's the partner in Flow, just bringing it back to the Flow. And so she helped actually develop the field of social impact finance, and was very much a core centerpiece at Stanford. And her father helped develop a lot of the real estate. So a lot of the early impact finance is targeting children and education, but also pre-K. So pre-K is a key aspect. Here I just have a little map from our Pegasus Park with all the stuff going on, but right in the middle is Todd Williams and Commit. So that's, again, if you're an oil man, you need a good pipeline. You need someone to get the, do the drilling and get the infrastructure. So that's Todd, right? And Strive Together.
Well, and you said you had a video of Andreessen where he's talking about how he doesn't like the whole water cooler thing, and talking about,
oh yeah, don't make me talk about football.
No, which, hey, I'm with you.
I mean, to have to stand there and talk about the football game, I can't.
But it was interesting because that is what they call the Pegasus Social Impact and Biotech Hub, where Todd Williams moved Commit, and which is Strive Together's Dallas version. But they call it the water cooler. So this picture is all these meeting of the minds in this creative water cooler space where everyone's come together with you got a charter school, and you've got UT Southwestern, and you've got all these, the education, nonprofit, all these people these groups coming together for this
experience.
Yeah, interesting.
That's the kind of experience that Neumann
would help Wildcatter is there too. Yeah,
Wildcatters. Yeah. And then DataKind was also sort of in that mix too. I remember there was a data analytics stuff that was partnered with Strive, and funneling the data out. I can't remember all the particulars about data.
It was machine learning, predictive analytics, and AI all working. They're doing all of that. It's DataKind, Microsoft, the TEA, and Commit all partnered to do this predictive analytics deal using millions of student data records from Texas. That was what it was.
And just to, like on this, I have like UT Austin and Paul Resta, who is connected to the National Laboratory for Education Transformation. So like finding out that Jason and I went by the, I'm trying to remember the name of the complex. It's outside of UT, it's outside of town, but it's like where their big supercomputing center is, where they were doing all of the education modeling.
You went to Pickle and you went
Pickle, JJ Pickle Research Lab. Yeah. So
I watch all your videos, Alice.
I'm like losing space. I have like 300 of these slides and all that space is like used up for this. But like also the Chamber of Commerce is sort of like right in the middle there. And that's the same in Philadelphia. Like when I, ended up going against people, it's like the chamber is, it's so funny because everyone is framing all of this as like the socialists. And I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure it's the Chamber of Commerce guys, like it's
the death chambers is what I call them. Yeah. All these words are interesting if you look at them from a different perspective.
Yeah. Chamber. Yeah, that's true. So I just like, this is from 2018, the Bezos, the big amount of money being thrown into pre-K. So like they're after like mining the littlest children because it's the pre-K kids that will grow up to live in the metaverse, really. Like we're only going to be at this transition zone, like those of us who are, in our 40s and 50s, but it's the children that need to be trained up to think that it's normal. So the other thing is we just found out with Bezos that his maternal grandfather was like working for DARPA in the Department of Energy in Albuquerque. And his mother was from Cotulla, did you say?
Oh yeah, Cotulla, Texas. And that's where LBJ taught these migrant children, which is the whole story. I was thinking, was that an early Teach for America pilot and then LBJ goes on to be president? It's not plausible. And then Bezos, which is interesting about these preschools is that they have one in Dallas College that they're setting up where I told you, where the green light stuff is taking root. They also, here, you've already got it. Yeah. And then in my grandmother, sorry, it's my husband.
No, I have that next. Yeah. So I just so I couldn't remember the name of the preschool program. Like I was trying to remember it, but there was a bill that was passed to say that if you met certain requirements, you were required to give full day preschool for 4-year-olds in every district. If you were qualified for free or reduced lunch, or in foster care, homeless, English language learner, had a parent who was an active duty Air Force service member, or a parent who was killed serving in active duty, or like who was killed in the line of duty being a emergency.
Children with some trauma and some,
So, but like that every district now is required to offer full day kindergarten for 4-year-olds. And then it's like optional for 3-year-olds. But there's this whole group of kids that again, like are more, you might like identify them as having other risk factors, not exactly risk, but they're, they have some challenges, either economic challenges, language challenges, other way, like family trauma.
Well, and see how it says as part of HB3, and that school finance reform bill was written by Todd Williams of the Commit Partnership, who has been influencing, he was appointed by the governor to be on the Public School Finance Commission. So you see, it's like, it's the same people.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, I want to just mention that, like, just to bring it back to flow, so we understand, like, within the context of what Adam Neumann and Marc, like, if you're building a purpose-built mixed-use development that has a workforce component or you're going to have a daycare in there, right? Like, and that these daycares will probably be franchises in some way, and that will be built with some sort of surveillance tech with data connected to it. And then this is all part of the Jim Heckman equation. Oh, you can make 7 to 13% rate of return using the fancy Heckman equation, or maybe 11% on Clive Belfield's social emotional learning equation, if you have this captive market of 4-year-olds, right? And I haven't quite figured it out, but all of this stuff about alternative energy and like data analytics and chaos modeling, I'm like, there's probably like no other place that you could capture so much energy and like innovative emergent behavior than like a preschool classroom, right?
And yeah, I mean, this just blows my mind. I've actually meant to go up there and see, because this is where my grandmother lives. She's 100. I was thinking, why are they putting a preschool in there in Presbyterian?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So Bezos, like at the time, he was going to put all this money into pre-K and homelessness. And like, I think it's to build the built environment, like to build the smart environment to get these data sets. And yeah, but so this is an academy in North Dallas. That's it's interesting. Light every fire. That's an interesting quote. So in North, they're opening a Bezos Academy preschool. Now this is based on a Montessori quote unquote model, which is self-directed learning, which is what you need for these independent agents creating data. And then they're partnering with Forefront Living for quote, sharing our belief that all children deserve a great start and that an excellent preschool provides. So they're supposed to be opening that this year. And here's an image. There's like, it's kind of odd. Like it looks like a very nice Oriental rug, like this little girl with puzzle pieces and letters. And I doubt that there's like an expensive antique Oriental rug in the middle of the preschool, but like that's the imaging that they're showing. And it says, we look for partners who share our commitment to service and community, said Mike George, president of Bezos Academy. It is wonderful to be working with Forefront Living, our second senior living host, to help fill the early learning gap in North Dallas while creating opportunities for interaction between generations. Bezos Academy Preschool will be located on the campus of Presbyterian Village North Senior Living Community at 8600 Skyline Drive, Dallas, 4 classrooms, full day, year-round schedule, slated to open in fall 2022. So now it's gotten pushed back again. But now I will just say, I'm not totally, like if you followed the narrative about bad things happening in nursing homes during the lockdowns, and you were concerned about access, like, would it make sense to co-locate preschool children? And I mean, I was never as sick as like when my kids started preschool, like, and I don't know about like, I know people are like, it's not virus. Like, I don't know. I just remember like the whole, like getting up to speed with your building, whatever. Like I was really sick when they were like 3 years old for quite a bit.
My husband and I would always talk about that is they go back to school and you would get sick 2 weeks later and everybody got sick. And then once it got a little older, you didn't have those awful viruses because your body built up the immunity. You were always around little germy kids.
Yeah. So I mean, and it's good. Like we love little germy kids, but like, it's just a strange in the context that people have been like,
shut down the world
shut down the world. And then, but by the way, we've decided to install preschools in all of the nursing homes. Like it just,
but then you're like, well, I mean, are they just going to peek at them through the window? Is it just be like a zoo, like we were watching them play? I don't know. The whole thing is so strange, especially if you know the campus and you think, well, and also they have to be retrofitted or they have to be completely transformed, even though these are new spaces. When they put these preschools in a community college, there are contractors that come in and they get the contracts because you have to do little sinks and little toilets. And all these code things have to be changed when they transform the spaces for little children.
And this is an investment. So like, we're not saying that we don't want people to have, like, I mean, realistically, affordable childcare is a huge issue, like for families that are required to be, 2-income families or single parent families. Like you need actually a place for kids to be until we can find an economy that actually supports people, that like actually considers, care work an equivalency to out of home work. Like I'm not saying that this isn't a need or that we don't want kids to have good places, but this is really, it's a strange combination. Like, why is Jeff Bezos setting these things up in nursing homes?
Knowing what you and I know, it is suspicious because we know that of other things that they're doing. Right.
Yeah. So here is Adam Neumann talking a little bit about the importance of public-private partnerships, and that essentially that the pie is so big that there's enough for everybody. So we'll just partner with everybody. We don't need to be exclusive.
But the answer to that and sort of how government can help, there are technology companies right now, construction companies, there are different things. There's a construction company here called Icon that's using technology that the government is going to need to partner with them at some point because they have found ways to build a home in 4 days. But the answer to that and sort of used to take a year and a half. And as you can do more and more of those things, what we're going to do is, I believe, through innovative technologies, be able to build it fast enough to give people the courage to go and build the new ones. But to go into the old ones is very hard. A crazy idea is office now, everything that's happening in office. Can you go and convert some of these dead offices into some new ideas? You could think about that. And I think the role of government has always been very important for this country. I think for us at Flow, and this is another lesson from the past, we used to think, and I used to think, we had to own everything. I think the category is so big that the only way we're going to achieve anything is through partnership with government, partnership with current players, and partnership with new players that are going to come. And I think it's the only way to solve this problem. And I'll finish by saying that I actually think the housing crisis that we described might be one of the biggest challenges that the US is facing today. But the reason it's hard to understand it, it's because if you really want to get it, it's 5 to 10 years down the road. The problem with housing, it takes 5 to 10 years. And Mark, I agree with your assumption that we have about 5 years to do something really big about it. And all I can tell you is, I think we have the right team to give it a shot.
Wow. So they've got a timeline there. Like
Right.
they know what the timeline is. And when he's talking about building a house in 4 days, that reminds me a lot of the casita house, the little tiny house projects that because they said, we're going to build these little houses like cars. So yeah, so that I mean, and it's a public-private partnership and they can team up with but they need the government to provide the access to the people, at least at first, to get all the digital identities. But like the government is needed to be the intermediary and the access point for the private capital, until eventually maybe the government will just disappear entirely and we will just be run by a cybernetic machine. So I included this slide. It's a New York Times article that's titled "How Opportunity Zones and Co-working Spaces Joined Forces." And these opportunity zones were ways for investors to essentially launder vast amounts of money into real estate and businesses. And for people who aren't familiar, governors were supposed to identify like 20% of their low-income census tracts as these zones, and that people could pour money into them with no protections from gentrification or out displacement, not just into buildings, but also businesses. And among those businesses, there was discussion around charter schools being one of these opportunity zones. So this is a feature that is, I think it's actually talking about Newark, like this idea of like putting like a co-working space in the opportunity zones in Newark, and using them as an anchor point to draw in more companies. So I think that the dynamic between those two are really important.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, one of the major drivers of the opportunity zones in Dallas is also tied to the Cristo Rey charter schools. I wrote an article about that several years ago, and he was in both spaces.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because Cristo Rey is actually one of our key school reform commission officials was connected to Cristo Rey too. And just for people who may not be familiar, the Catholic Church in Philadelphia a number of years ago, did major waves of closing parish schools. But then what they would do is they actually would reopen them as a non-parish Catholic school. So it wasn't actually grounded in the community the same way that the early parochial schools were. It was run by a larger organization under the umbrella of the Catholic Church. And then Cristo Rey specifically, it was really centered on work-based learning. It was a private school, but they would offer subsidies, but often the kids would have to do work-based learning on top of that. And it was definitely part of the work hard, the bootstrap, the stuff that you're kind of here in the Acton Academy. And again, I'm not saying that kids should be lazy or whatever, but I do think that there are questions about child labor laws and access, because in Philadelphia, at least, a lot of the Cristo Rey schools would go into places where the public schools had been closed, and there might not even be any non-charter option so a relatively low cost Catholic school as compared to the Quaker schools or the big private schools, that felt like the only option for people.
Interesting.
Yeah. So here's a slide. It's talking about supportive housing being part of this Pay for Success finance. This is from the Urban Institute. So supportive housing is where you're providing social services around transitional housing for people who had formerly been homeless. And then there's a cover article from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which is linked to Laura Andreessen through Stanford, driving change in housing policy with advocacy and organizing. So again, break it so you can remake it the way that you want. And so here, this is the thing I really wanted to talk with you about, like specifically, because we've gone broadly through education and preschool and all these other things, but they're in Lake Highlands, is that right?
Yes, Lake Highlands is in Dallas, and that's the neighborhood that is in District 10 of the city. Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit about, like, do you remember about like this campus that was being proposed? I guess it's on the back burner now. They haven't still quite pulled it off yet, but this idea of having sort of a campus set up for, I'm assuming, sort of transitional housing for people who, you know, need housing assistance and are being prepared to be reskilled for stuff.
Yeah, and housing is a major issue that's constantly being brought up. Solutions for Housing and the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance, they changed their name to Housing First. But so there are ongoing proposals that come up, and what happens is in this particular district, there are 2 apartments for every 1 house, so there's an imbalance as compared to the other districts in Dallas, and there are I think 14 city council districts. So, but there's opportunity in this district in Lake Highlands because of the cost of land, and so they propose this, and then the communities come and they fight it, the people who live around them, because there's so much the panhandlers and drugs and all of those issues around this same area. So the neighborhood, the neighborhood surrounding it, they stand up and fight against it, and they call them NIMBYs, not in my backyard. But if you look at the other parts of Dallas, there's a complete imbalance. So it's always concentrating on this one particular area for these proposals. So Bonton is a development and a successful model of, and it's not in this district, but they were trying to propose a Bonton-like model for Lake Highlands. But there was all kinds of controversy because the city councilman was trying to get a job with the company, this city of Refuge, that was going to do this deal. And so he had a major conflict of interest. It was exposed. And he's about to roll off. He's termed out, but they're proposing something similar again. So it's
the Bonton, it was like an urban farm, right?
Like an urban farm, a very creative model. They have honey that they sell out of there, and people come and they're given work, and it gives them all kinds of skills, whether if they're coming out of prison or whatever the social ill is. Bonton is successful by all accounts. It appears to be a successful model, and so they were trying to replicate that in Dallas. In Lake Highlands, another part of Dallas. And so that's
and you can see how like the food security and the wellness, I can, because I'm coming from Bartram's Garden, like having seen that setup, like with the data that you could do that as a cost offset, right? Of like diabetes or some other things, like providing fresh produce in a city situation. It would be a health and wellness cost offset. And I'm just imagining that in the context of this flow scenario, right? You've got mixed use. And, on the one hand, I'm not against, I'm not looking for a giant sprawl community, soulless, heartless. I do like the idea of walkable communities with mixed uses, with these different things. I just really don't like the idea of turning them into outside in robots, right? I don't want a sensor beacon on the end of every raised garden bed to figure out how many people are weeding on a regular basis, so you can get the points on the blockchain ledger to let Mr. Diamond bet on it.
Yeah, the people, if you look at it, there's nothing inherently wrong with a 15-minute city if it were being designed as an organic thing where you could actually access these convenient things right there within 15 minutes, and a healthier city. But then if you overlay this sensor network on it, that's not what people want. And that's not what they're being told about a city that is you know, whether it's a smart city or a 15-minute city. Those, when I go around and talk to groups, the 15-minute city comes up a lot. And so, but they don't really understand the thing that undergirds these 15-minute cities.
Yeah. Now, so this was a diagram from the city of Refuge about like what they envisioned the land use would be on this campus that hasn't been developed yet. But this was sort of their drawing board of like what they were thinking about, that it would have a 4-acre urban farm and a coffee house, because I guess everybody has to have a coffee house, and a farmer's market. I guess that would be drawing in the public, right, to create a revenue stream, a workforce innovation hub, tiny homes, co-working space, corporate training, community rooms, and healthcare clinics. So you get the education spend, you've got the housing spend, and you've got the healthcare spend, like all in this campus.
An adult wraparound.
Mm-hmm. Adult wraparound. And again, these tiny houses, while they may be, you know, like for a temporary situation, but like no family's going to live in a tiny house for any amount of time. Like essentially what we're saying is people are not going to be entitled to a normal, like what most of us grew up understanding as a normal living arrangement, and are going to be like shoehorned into these tiny pods because that's what they're going to be set up to collect the data.
Well, and that's the part of the response from the community, is that because we live in a corridor of rows and rows of multifamily housing units that were at one time when they were built, you were not allowed to live in them with a family. So now they've had to retrofit, they've had to fill in some of the pools to put in playground space and make them more accommodating for families. And so you'll have 10 people living in one little apartment unit. That happens all up and down this corridor and so the community members who come and they fight this, it's because that's not even acceptable for people, much less the tiny units, like what you said. They're not conducive to families, sadly.
Well, and so these are a few slides also from that same John Clippinger presentation from 2017 on city science. One of them, it has a group of like 4 images of crowds, one looking to be like go back into, it's hard to say, they're in robes. I don't know if it's a Greek agora or like a monastery, but various kinds of group scenes. And it says human space assemblies as a commons of civic value creation. And so I think it's important to understand, like, not that I'm saying that people together don't create value, but they're looking to commodify and formalize that value in community. So limit private space, push people into public space again, like, but not really being open about why they're doing it. And then using those public interactions to gather data. And then the next slide says data are the lifeblood of sustainable vital cities. So then it's starting to feel a bit like a parasite, you know, or a tick, you know, like go out there and do some weeding in the public garden so we can get the data, you know, to sustain our vital cities. And these cities are, the next slide is a fusion of physical and digital augmented city spaces, which all of this seems so creepy. Like, I wonder like what it was in the audience when he's like pitching this talk about like the data, and the lifeblood literally is in red. Like he's like really emphasizing the blood part. It's like, oh my God.
I may have sent you this last week, but Margaret Spellings was just recently, and you know, she's with Texas 2036, and they're all about data and in water in Texas. But she was talking about the water crisis, and she said water is the lifeblood. That was the quote from her last week.
Oh, interesting. There is something too about water, like the crystalline nature of water, for sure. So this is a little clip from the Hulu documentary about the We Live, that there's not much privacy. And I will say, I was talking with Cliff, because he has been doing some work in and around Seattle, like construction. And he was talking about like the rise of these like 200 square foot apartment units, like barely even a studio. And that these are going up all around Seattle that are in proximity to workforce corridors, like the hospital, the university, and that you're supposed to accept this tiny, tiny footprint in order that you can just walk out the house and go right to your job.
The Murphy bed was built into the couch. There was a little desk tucked into a corner that you can put your computer on. The whole thing may have been 200 square feet, might have been 200 square feet, like on a good day. But it was all about community.
a lot of people worked at WeWork who lived at We Live at the time.
A very, very small percentage of us were outsiders, I guess you could say. The first 6 months was weird if someone left the building. If someone were like, hey, I'm going to a friend's birthday party, and the very common next question is, oh, which floor is it on?
That's one of the benefits of co-living is you move in, you get friends automatically, you spend time with them. So it becomes your whole social circle.
Yep. The ant computer.
The pheromones leading them.
So now that's being pitched as like, again, like professional upwardly mobile people. So I guess this is what it would look like if you are in transitional housing and you're a person in need. This is a City of Refuge video, and they're based in Atlanta. And so they were the NGO that was brought in that with plans to run the campus in the one in the Dallas metro area.
At City of Refuge, we know there is a better way. For over 20 years, we have been working with locals to implement a process that restores communities and brings lasting hope to the good people that call it home. Our approach first utilizes a campus in the very heart of the
community. It looks like a computer
With
grid.
a safe and secure campus, we are able to invite people in crisis into an environment that has everything needed to address both immediate and long-term needs. Immediate needs are met through on-site programs based around food, housing, and healthcare. Long-term needs are met through programs based around education, job training, and financial literacy. All of this is available under one roof without a person needing to leave their community. By having critical needs met under one roof.
The little person, he looks like a little agent in a game, and he literally has a circle around him, like a little circle.
Individuals and families are able to start an uninterrupted journey towards transformation until they're equipped to live independently.
That's cybernetics. There's your pathway, an uninterrupted journey.
When an individual is healthy and equipped for long-term independence, they are then able to see and impact their community in meaningful ways. This results in new jobs, safer housing, restored families, consistent
Now, I just want to point out the gospel part, because again, I keep saying that the faith communities, the institutions are a central part of what's coming with the pathways.
exposure to the gospel and greater opportunities for the community as a whole. We believe that as light and hope continue to grow, entire communities can be transformed.
But into what? What are we transforming into? That's the question.
Right.
And
yeah,
so
it's hard not to come across as cynical or somehow insensitive, but that's not really where we're coming from. It really is because there's more to it and people can't see the layers behind it.
Well, I mean, to me, that looks like a containment zone, like, especially if you're like, okay, your plans are to be reskilled and go to the clinic and sit in your tiny house. Like, and you know, I know a lot of faith communities do like genuine charitable work, but it's going to be set up so that, like, in order to do it, you're going to need to have a data capture program. Like, it's not going to have, like, I think that there's going to be a lot of money flowing through this in terms of like the money that was going through humanitarian quote unquote aid is going to now come domestically, and it's going to come with strings attached. And so managing people, like managing dispossessed people, whether it's through economic displacement, through climate or storms or, various emergencies, or like they're going to create, like there's an imperative to create refugees and people on the move, because people on the move create more data than stable people, honestly. I mean, like if you're in transition, you're creating a lot more data once you're attached into all these cycles. And so I remember
talking about it with the refugee crisis, or the IRC and Catholic Charities, they keep doing the refugee resettlement in the same district. It's in that same corridor where I'm talking about. And so, of course, there's less inventory for housing when they will literally take over an entire housing apartment complex. And so then there's nothing left for those who actually live here. Right. I mean, whether you're talking about people, and on the verge of homelessness, or you're talking about even veterans. And I mean, there are so many people and teachers, like you can't find affordable housing in the districts where teachers or the first responders live. So they have to go to the outskirts and, go outside Dallas.
That's by design. Because I think actually
exactly.
what's coming with the flow is that they're going to create these affordable housing units, and they're going to say, look, but we do a social benefit by providing it, by benefiting the community, by housing people who are, core contributors, whether, safety or education. And so we're going to, we want credit for that, like on the blockchain, that's part of the tokenization.
Right. No, they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. And so like a few weeks ago, you sent me, and I don't know that this is exactly it, but I have something here. It says Dallas taxpayers will turn a hotel into a homeless shelter. That this is like one of 5, but this idea of like repurposing like unused buildings into like temporary housing places. Now, I don't remember if the hotel you were talking to me about was like permanent housing or transitional housing, but you're like, there's something up with this, like what's going on with this program. And then I sent you an article that I saw that someone had shared online that in England, they were deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda to like a multiplex family, like a housing unit where they would sort of stay in transition, like almost like on house arrest in this co-living house, but until they could be processed and transitioned to some other place. And to me, like when I saw that, so that's these 2 slides. And then the next slide says like, oh, like you each get 1 bedroom and you have communal toileting and shower facilities and communal eating facilities. So it really is like a dorm, like a college dorm environment. And I feel like when you talk about the refugee relocations and like managing people into these impact programs, like it's going to be like this. They've already set up this model. Like we can just push people around the game board and then have them behave. And in their behaving, we can generate the data that we want.
Yeah. And so people don't understand that is not just by accident and because of greedy, capitalists and corporate, the influence and control, that this is actually much bigger than that. And that's the piece that the locals who will say, oh, NIMBY, y'all are NIMBY. They don't understand that there is a global game going on here, and these are just results of different, like you said, they're moving the game board around, but that people can't, they think that's it's not somehow connected to a larger
well, it's hard to imagine it, like I mean, and when I was doing my whole that I did like a 3-part series, 3 or 4 parts about refugees and like the growth in refugee populations, how huge it is. And they're planning on it being bigger because the refugees are the ones being experimented on for these digital payment systems, for the biometrics, for the smart housing. Like there are the Syrian refugees in particular, like
cohort, I guess, is kind of
like they were used for a certain way. So like you can have compassion and caring for all those people, but realistically, most people don't want to leave where they live and be pushed out by gang violence or economic, military involvement or economic warfare. Like they want to actually just live where they're from because that's their culture.
Improved conditions where they're from. And, my friend Joyce talks about how Dallas, back when she grew up there in the 60s or 50s and 60s, and talking about what busing did to her neighborhood and her teachers. And she would say, I'm not for it. But that, that disruption under the guise of civil rights ended up being something different. It resulted in something different.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I didn't realize, because you don't know the history. Like I have a friend whose mother, I think she taught in Chicago. She's African American, and she was saying like actually integration allowed them to like fire like so many Black teachers.
Yes. And
they just let all the teachers go. Like, and I didn't know that. Like it was a way of like actually pushing out a whole cohort of trained professionals in education, and then like legitimizing it in the name of something else. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that that's what happened. She's like, yeah, that's
she's
what happened.
Black, and she would say it disrupted her neighborhood, her community, and it created chaos. Yeah, it's too bad.
So anyway, this is the casita. We talked about this in the past, but it supposedly kind of went out of business, or they're using it for other things. But in the video, they talk about like wanting to roll these off like cars, and they're smart connected units. They're these tiny, they would be like, so this is 325 square feet of Internet of Things heaven is how they, and this is from 2017. Yeah, this would be kind of like the We Live size. Now they want to pitch it as mid-century modern, and it's so efficient, and it knows you, and it knows when to turn the lights on and what kind of music you like, and everything. And then they actually have racks where they would have 4 stacked up. And that these racks almost literally look like a server rack. Like this is like the Matrix, only you're not in a GUI pod, you're in a casita, and it has all of the IoT technology. So when Adam Neumann is saying, oh, we have ways of building housing in 4 days, like we can totally innovate all of this. Like, I think he must be talking about this kind of technology.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And so if you're trapped in one of these units, there's this thing called Up Together, which is linked to the Oakland Universal Income Basic pilot. And one of the guys who was underwriting the data tracking for the Up Together improvement platform was Jerry Brown, the governor of California. So again, this family independence initiative is using online platforms to essentially train low-income families in the behaviors that are acceptable to like get a housing voucher. So I wrote an article about this FII program that Brown was involved with, and literally they were demanding that the people who got subsidized housing vouchers participate in this Up Together program to do online journaling with input information about their income and savings, their health, their education, their skills, their housing, and their leadership and their connections, and that they would have people comment about it, like as a social media platform, and that it would help create a hustle score. Like it's just kind of an abomination of like what this is all, where this is all going. And so I think when they talk about entrepreneurial spirit, like really what they're going to train the people in these tiny houses for is to do coding work, like to be just the most basic level coding work. And that's what these impact finance bonds have been coming around, career impact bonds. Now they frame it as entrepreneurialism, but really what they mean is a gig tech economy worker to build this thing out. And so the city of Refuge, they got a $5.4 million grant to have a tech transformation academy through the Department of Labor. And they were partnered with Google on that. And so you would go through their program, and then you had a chance at getting an engineer's job for $55,000. which might not sound bad if you didn't have any job, but the reality is that the average job salary in Atlanta is $74,000. So like you're coming out, like you're still way behind. Like even with the 55,000, like it's going to be hard to catch up. So that's what the city of Refuge was promoting. And then like, let me see, within that, like the General Assembly is the social finance, social impact bonds for coding training. It's a coding boot camp, and it's a career impact bond that social finance was doing. So when we went, actually, we were in the WeWork building. Do you remember, like in Austin, when we came to visit, and that we were running around that day all over the campus, Jason and I, and we met up and we went to the WeWork building, and in the basement was that was the place where social finance had their address, their mailing address. And I stood in the basement and I said, this is what's happening. They're going to take vulnerable people and they're going to train them to build a metaverse with these impact bonds. Now, yeah, they're going to be in tiny houses. Wow. I know, it's kind of crazy how it's all coming together. Like it just hit me now. I'm like, that's right. We were in the WeWork building.
Yeah. Of 600 Congress Avenue in Austin. And it was really interesting when I was doing some research around social finance that their American division had an office in Austin, but the website said that the address was forthcoming. But it did have a presence officially on the 14th floor of this building, 600 Congress Avenue, which is the WeWork co-working space. And so what seems like it happens is that a lot of these companies sign up and they create their address in the co-working spaces. And so it's interesting that social finance at least has some sort of presence in this building. There are many companies that do. Another one is actually General Assembly. Now, General Assembly is a coding boot camp. And what is interesting about that in Austin is that Social Finance and General Assembly have partnered on a new form of sort of human capital finance educational training called the Career Impact Bond. Now, these bond programs, their pilot was targeting 1,000 students to do training in coding, and especially with an interest in returning citizens, people who had been formerly incarcerated. And so all of this is about measurable data tied to attainment of credentialing, these stackable credentials, which is what these human capital bond markets are going to be tied to. So it may not even be that the people who go through these coding boot camps ever actually attain the employment, but that they can demonstrate that they have a stackable credential, and then eventually there'll be another stackable credential and another. So there's a certain level of irony in people who have been involved in the judicial system, then coming out and then being trained to code the metaverse, which is essentially the giant open air prison. So as I mentioned earlier in my previous section over at the LBJ School of Public Policy, that this global impact GSG Impact Conference, virtual conference is happening, and Sir Ronald Cohen, who's of the UK, father of social finance in the UK, is a presence at that conference. And again, it's hard to say what his involvement would be in Austin, but the fact that both Social Finance US have an Austin footprint here in the WeWork space, as well as General Assembly and the Career Impact Bonds are important. It's an important piece of the puzzle. And it's interesting that really a lot of this stuff is somewhat fictitious in that there's not a real footprint here. It's in sort of these temporary liminal zones that are not even investing in a real office. Like, you don't even actually have a real physical footprint. And eventually they may, but at least in these getting off the ground, it's tied in with just very temporary circumstances. All of these companies are not long-term companies. These are entities that could be, here today, gone tomorrow, and that's a concern, especially when they're targeting vulnerable populations for impact finance.
And so Grameen, I talked about this a little bit with Leo, this microfinance. It's actually based in Bangladesh, but they have a presence in California that they were doing. They developed something called the Progress Out of Poverty Index. So that would be the data analytics. It's connected to Cello. And now, again, Cello and Grameen are working. Cello is the blockchain identity program. And they were doing initiatives with displaced people in the Philippines who were put out of work by COVID-19. And then they're going to sell them packages of entrepreneurial programs. And they could either raise poultry, bake pastries, or process jams or meat. So like, in order to get this universal basic income, you literally had 4 choices. Now, I'm pretty sure that it's going to be less pastry baking and more coding. Like, literally, they're going to make people code.
So the other piece, when we talk about the faith thing, is my former mega church where I used to go, and that's where I would do the job ministry. We never tracked and, sorted people. We were just there to help them navigate the job search. But since then, in partnership with the city of Refuge, is the mega church. And so, and our city councilman was also a member of the mega church, the same church.
City of Refuge connected to your church, or the church who was doing job ministry? Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, but because I could never really get to what was really going on with that. But I will say that Watermark set up a corporation, and it's called the Watermark Community Development Corporation. And I'm just putting this out there because I know that it somehow incorporates the faith and the tokenized future that is being put into place, and then your good behavior or your good works will somehow be measured. And but I don't think most people who are involved in it know that or think that, but there is a work piece of it. And then they also took over a shuttered campus in Dallas ISD called Pearl C. Anderson. So yeah, it's definitely the direction that a lot of churches are going. And I know you've picked up on that in all faiths. Like you went to the Mormon Transhumanism Conference. We've seen what's happening like with Tikkun Olam, and all faiths will be wrapped up in this.
They want that, actually. Like, that's something I was talking about yesterday. the Templeton Foundation, who is Presbyterian. So it's interesting that you mentioned that the place where they were, that retirement community with the pre-K was a Presbyterian affiliate. That's interesting. But so, they were interested in spiritual capital, literally. Like they had this meta nexus group, and they were investing in spiritual capital back in like 2005. Because they understood there was social capital and spiritual capital. And then Templeton wanted to bring together science and religion. So they know that there's something important, like I think even energetically about like faith-based practice, but they're trying to get their arms around it. Like they're trying to like, can we contain it within the circuit? Like the switch, can we get the switch?
Well, you know, and Billy Graham was talking to Oracle at that conference before he died. And he's talking about, well, I wish y'all could come up with a way to get people to do, I forget how he worded it, but he was basically saying, hey, Oracle, can y'all come up with a way to make people do right, do good?
Oh, that's fine. So this is a little clip about what the opportunity zones are. And I just I was protesting this at the time because I realized this was at the federal level. There was no protection for displacement, right? So you redline communities, you gut them out, you buy them cheap, and then you remake them and you make them unaffordable for normal people. And essentially what they're saying is there's just no protection. You just go talk to your city council people. Maybe they can do something for you. So it's just a tragedy, the whole opportunity zone stuff.
Agreed.
So this just summarizes, you can see under the 3 different investment scenarios with investments held for 5, 7, and 10 years. The investment held for 10 years enjoys the highest return due to the elimination of taxes on the gains from their opportunity zone investment. And that's really the goal of the program, is to encourage this
money laundering. Essentially, it's money laundering.
Is all it is.
And they have 10 years because it's only these really big players that would have enough liquidity that you could lock something up for 10 years and just sit on it.
They're the only ones that know about it either.
Yeah.
Investment in communities. So right now, local communities are working to organize themselves like we're doing here, identify potential projects, which we'll hear about shortly, and begin to engage with investors to figure out how exactly this is going to work in our communities. So as I said, we're still waiting for Treasury and IRS regulations before things will really get moving. But in the meantime, communities and different groups are also engaging with Treasury and IRS throughout this rulemaking process. So a large part of the concerns are around how to document these low-income community benefits and address.
Now, I would say, so the low-income community benefits. So that's where the smart environment and flow fit comes in. They need to, and I talked about this some with Leo, they need to be able to prove that they improved your education, your well-being, your mental health, your economic empowerment. And that all comes on these data dashboards.
Address gentrification pressures. So we want to ensure that vulnerable communities are protected from displacement and that these investments in opportunity zones are truly benefiting the people that they're meant to. And the current tax code as written doesn't really address that. So that's some of the work that's going on in Washington.
So that's why they need the impact finance, right? So they probably didn't write any protection into the law so that they can come back later and make it an impact market. If they protected the people up front, you wouldn't actually have the cost offset opportunity. You could say look, we didn't hurt you that much. Look how much we didn't hurt you with our new development.
Yeah, the cost offset, that's a really difficult thing to explain to people when they ask about the whole mechanism behind the impact finance.
Yeah.
As you know.
So examples could be having additional requirements or annual reporting metrics, ways to measure that these investments are benefiting the local communities.
Yeah. So that's key, what she said. We don't have protection, but later we're going to actually come up with a way to make sure that we help people. And that's the outside in robot, right? Oh, the outside in robot says that you're this amount happier, right? Or the outside in robot says you're supposed to be 20% happier, and we're are you on track? And then someone's betting that you will be 20% and someone will be betting that you don't hit your target. And that's the trickiest part of these impact finance schemes, is that someone's betting the backside always. So here I just have a couple images from Dallas, like evidently you guys have 15 designated opportunity zones. And then I have another, this is from a newspaper article from 2022 that a Kentucky-based developer of affordable apartments has gotten funding for a project in Northwest Dallas for workforce housing. So again, that's going to be the benefit. Like, oh, we've assigned the benefit of having an affordable house for a teacher at X, or an affordable place for an EMT is Y. And then that will be baked in. And then, you know, goodness knows, like people will get identifiers, and with every fob, like think what you said, like you have a fob, like imagine you have a fob, not just for the garage, but your whole apartment access. Like every time the fob queues up, it'll be like ka-ching, tiny micro payment for paying for the EMT to live like close to where they work.
Yeah, and that Royal Lane right there and that Northwest Dallas one, that's not far from where the city of Refuge was, that space too. It's very close.
Interesting. So yeah, the Federal Reserve is part of all of this stuff. They have the community development requirements. There's something called the Community Reinvestment Act that's being reformed. And essentially, I guess this came about maybe in the 70s or 80s, and they're like, you're right, we were bad about doing all the redlining. So now we're going to make the banks actually be responsive to their communities. And so you have to prove that you do a certain amount in the communities that you serve of your deposits. And that's administered by the Federal Reserve. And a lot of that goes into affordable housing development. So the Federal Reserve, especially of San Francisco, Ian Galloway, is like at the middle of all the pay for success finance stuff.
And same in Dallas with the commit and the Federal Reserve, the former president who left after some shady investments, but he's moving into that Pegasus Park space. So the Federal Reserve is setting up this new economy, even though that would seem counter to its whole purpose.
Right. Because it's about the singularity. It's not just about money. And people haven't got their heads around that it's not just about the money, because they can always print more money to give to the people that they want to give it to. Like it's about the data and the singularity. So this is out of the St. Louis Fed, their community development, connecting community redevelopment acts to the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, promising policies for bank responsiveness to workforce development. So it's not just workforce housing, it's actually training up the workforce. And then this was, I have another image that's a hearing from 2006, a congressional hearing before the House, before the Subcommittee on Federalism and the Census. That's interesting. Committee on Government Reform, U.S. House of Representatives. So this topic was poverty, public housing, and the CRA have housing and community investment incentives helped public housing families achieve the American dream. Now, so there's this weird nexus of like affordable housing and the Federal Reserve and workforce and reskilling and training. But essentially what Marc Andreessen and Adam Neumann are standing up or sitting in front of the audience saying is like, we envision a near future where the vast majority of people are not homeowners and are not actually building up equity through home ownership, even though that actually is, at least as far as like our growing up years, like the American dream has been most people, like besides maybe a 401k, the equity that they have is in their home. Yep. And that's going to be out of reach for most people. But you can use the home as a basis for not only getting credit for housing someone who's in an attractive workforce category, but also probably training them. And I think that's where the UBI will come in. It's like you'll get a housing credit if you're pursuing a pathway, a workforce pathway that's deemed desirable. Then they'll underwrite your ability to like have housing access, but it's all contingent. And that this is framed as something called a social purpose organization. Now, I talked about this a little bit in the previous podcast with Leo. This is Coast Capital, which is Canada's largest federal financial cooperative, but they're developing social purpose companies in alignment with the United Way. And we know that the United Way and this ALICE program is really key. So I was talking with Leo a little bit. Here they're talking about growing the social purpose economy, that they would use real estate and incorporate like a real estate investment fund, like a REIT, into a DAO. Like you could almost create a purpose-built neighborhood and incorporate it on the blockchain and then maybe offer tokens to the residents where they get a share in the value that they create in the community. And it would be like fall under a benefit corporation because it would be a social purpose. And so you would essentially, it would be like what Adam Neumann, he talked about in his, like in the presentation with Marc Andreessen, he was after a capitalist kibbutz. Like, so you would create like maybe a cooperative model, but it's all encompassing, like work, play, live, education, healthcare, all in one unit.
Well, you know, with the REIT, so the PAC that is in Dallas for the real estate, they're getting involved in education and the elections. And so when I ran for Dallas College, the Dallas County Community College District, they hosted a forum. I think why they're so interested in the community college is the land because they were built on these massive acres of land, and there's 7 colleges across the metroplex.
Oh, that's an interesting observation, Lynn. I like that.
I also got, a candidate in Farmers Branch near us, he sent me a document that has the whole planned community. They are planning this within the community college in that North Dallas area. So they will incorporate the housing, you live on the campus, and they're trying to extend it's not 2 years, it's going to be 4 years for these upskilling, reskilling plans, whether it's teaching or whatever, it's not. So yes, I mean, this is right in line with that. And then you've got the contractors and the construction companies who will then have more projects that they can develop.
And it'll be smart appliances, because like that's part of what I was talking about with Leo, it'll all be sustainable, right? So, and Cliff was even saying, like he said, these units were very, very small, but they were still expensive because they had all these smart appliances in them. So, and for the sustainability protocols, like to get to check the boxes that they were sustainable. So it was like all of these smart, which I hate all of the smart appliances. Give me a dial. I don't want to like, give me something.
I want an old jam box. I don't want any kind of system that's connected.
Yeah, exactly. But like you can see how they would be packing on like LEED certification, workforce certification, like all this stuff. And then even remember like the talk with Luce when he was at the All Angels or whatever. And he's like, well, you know, companies are just like to have the kids from preschool on, and you know, why can't you just have the company, have the campus, you know, the school right there on the corporate campus? You can
Exxon your mom could go downstairs and the preschool's there.
I do believe we need to work with the private sector to figure out how to get the private sector engaged. Again, I believe you do that through public-private partnerships. You've got to figure out how to engage the private sector to make it realistic. Number 2, my dream's always been larger. I'd love to see somebody like Texas Medical District or Texas Instruments or huge employers one day say, I'd like to house on my property a K through 12 public school or age 2 through high school, through a community college on my campus. And I'm going to use that as a recruitment tool. And I'm going to get the state to say any employee of ours, regardless of whether they live in Katy or the Woodlands or Houston ISD, can go to this public school if you work here. Parents can come there for lunch, go meet with a teacher. Believe me, the business would be invested in the success of that school. And so there's lots of things we can do if we truly convince ourselves that the future of our state and of our business is absolutely wrapped up in this happening.
Well, also remember that ASU summit where they had all the Dallas people, the blockchain pre-K to gray. It was called liquidity, credentialed liquidity or something. It was pre-K to gray was the hashtag, and they had all the Dallas College and Greenlight and all those people on stage with Dallas ISD's superintendent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so this is just from a document about affordable housing in opportunity zones, but they're looking about the impact data, right? Like, how do we change the stability for people? How do we improve their mental health? How do we create make them physically healthier in the invested community? How do we make them feel safer? Which again, feeling safer means there's more surveillance. like of the people. Like that's what, like, can I help you feel safe? Well, let me put up some more artificial vision cameras.
Well, and that continuum of care, and also the housing, homeless count. So when they do that, all of that is tied in. And these people, like I met a woman the other day at a dinner, and she's in charge of the Housing First, which used to be the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. Has no idea about any of this stuff, but probably understands that there are things that are not adding up with her role. If I had to guess.
Right, because you need to count for the impact offset. Right.
Yeah.
And
so I'm going to send her this video because she needs to know all of these pieces here, because she's a political pawn in many ways, thinking that she's there to help house individuals. And they'll always say the solution to housing is housing, or the solution to homelessness is housing. That's their kind of militant stance. Like, no more talk about anything else. Now it's just give them housing. That's the solution.
But because that's going to be a casita, like you need them in a house to be part of the sensor network. I mean, that's because the housing that's ultimately going to be given is not unconditional housing with no data. It's like, we want you housed so we can get the data off of you. And then there's a lot built into this that, you know, hand holding about finances, you know, getting people into homes, which again, I'm not saying, like, I actually think it's great, but like what Adam Neumann talks about is like, you are going to work with them because they offer financing. Like they're going to offer a rental agreement with, it is going to be on blockchain, and you're going to be earning tokens, and then they're going to give you financial wellness. And like, I'm sorry, I don't trust venture capital's financial wellness plan for me. Like there's a reason that they have all the money. It's because that they know what the game is. And so this is just a slide share from about workforce housing. It's from 2016. It's an organization that I hadn't heard of before, the Urban Land Institute. And it's interesting because this is called the Terwilliger Center. And later we'll find out a little bit more about Mr. Terwilliger, but he was the head of residential housing development for Trammell Crow for 30 years, and also like a major donor to the Naval Academy. And so he was involved in this Urban Land Institute, and they're going to sort of set up the affordable housing. And I'm sure initially the Pay for Success finance was targeted with HUD and maybe the Department of Labor and like the prison system for people returning from prison. But clearly there's going to be different sections. So some will be for homelessness, some will be for returning citizens, and some will be for the workforce. And they specifically mentioned Pay for Success finance in this.
I love the term strike force, you know, when they use that in that last slide. And also the EB5 deal. So they've set up a deal. There's a Dallas legislator who has a company, Civitas, and he actually hired a guy who's been tied to all the education reform articles through D Magazine. And the EB5 program will basically give an incentive to Chinese investors, and they can bring their whole family over, and they get bumped to the head of the line for immigration with that deal.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think I seem to remember, the EB5 playing into the charter school stuff somehow. I'm trying to remember that. But so this is a New York Times article about Philadelphia, and it's like from 2015, and it's talking about renovating an old historic factory building in Kensington, which is again a place that's sort of like the center of the heroin epidemic, but also gentrifying. Like it's kind of at this cusp of like, it's on transit, so it's like real estate wise attractive, and they're pushing, you know, the addicts around, and then it's sort of like it's all up for grabs right now. But yeah, so they were in Kensington, and it said that when the building was renovated, 60% of the building's 114 apartments would be reserved for teachers, who will get a 25% discount on market rent. And then it says in addition, a quarter of the space is being turned into offices for education-related nonprofits like Teach for America, which will have 10,000 square feet as its regional headquarters. And so you can see how they're layering in, like the teachers. Like I remember early on seeing some articles about like charter schools with teacher housing built on top, and like that would be like dorm housing, because you'd have mostly like people right out of college, and they wouldn't have a family, so they wouldn't mind like a we live kind of model program. But you can see how the mixed use is going to go. And then they're going to layer like, again, preservation credits, LEED credits, workforce housing credits, and get it all together. And then just moving on a little bit to the real estate, like we're sort of in our home stretch here, but Eli Broad, we both know, like he was front and center in the education privatization space for many years. Like he was a key, the Broad Institute, training up the change agent superintendents, pushing the charter school agenda. And, I guess I didn't really stop and look and see where his money came from, but it actually came from real estate, like budget housing development, and then insurance, life insurance. So both things that are going to play into this pay for success finance. Now, he later also was a major donor to biomedical research. So synthetic biology. And so what I'm trying to say here is, like, it's interesting how in the embodiment of Pegasus Park, in the ed tech and biotech, how they're coming together, and that like a number of players in the space who are working both in education, privatization, and the health tech, like came out of real estate. And then like thinking about the role of real estate and what's coming next. So yeah, KB Homes and Sun America. So that was Eli Broad. And then I'm seeing a lot of these new apartments coming in with charter schools, like they're integrating charter schools into the planned developments. And let me just keep going. So then we've got this exclusive bizarre enclave of family offices. Lynn, do you want to tell me a little bit about what this is?
Well, on MLK Day, when you came to visit me, I said, let's go check out Old Parkland. But because it was a holiday and we did not have an appointment there, the security guard met us. He was very kind, and we were telling him how beautiful the place was. And he said, before you leave, you got to go. He's basically saying, you got to leave, but before you leave, you got to go check out the debate chambers. And so he actually let us see them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we sort of saw, so Old Parkland is the site of one of the hospitals, right? It was a hospital.
Nurses dorm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was it polio research stuff was done there, or?
Polio research was right across the street, but there supposedly were wings or where the nurses who were working on the polio stuff. Mm-hmm.
And then, so it's essentially like the most elite real estate for corporations in Dallas. Like if you want to get a foothold in Dallas, it's invitation only. And you go through Harlan Crow.
Right. And Todd Williams, who I mentioned earlier with the Commit partnership, he has his family foundation offices there. Commit is in Pegasus Park, but Todd's, his family foundation and his office is there, along with Texas 2036 and some other, and I've heard that George Bush has offices there, and former Mayor Mike Rawlings too.
Yeah. And so, and so the Southwestern Medical Foundation has offices there. I didn't realize that, but it said in 2012, the foundation returns to its original home on the same grounds where Southwestern Medical College began, by the original Parkland Hospital on what is now called the Old Parkland campus. So, I have that counterpoised with UT Southwestern making a big move to Pegasus Park Biotech. And again, they want the health data and the education data. So you've got someone who, so Harlan Crow, his background was in Crow Holdings, real estate, and Trammell Crow, like was part of, and so like, yeah, real estate development, conservative, American Enterprise Institute, Club for Growth, trustee of the George Bush Presidential Library, like all the things, and also Southwestern Medical. And so Trammell Crow, actually, the other piece of this is understanding like the real estate market. And I never dived in super deeply. I know that there were people who looked more closely at these real estate investment trusts and some of the like tax crediting stuff around real estate investment and how that all worked in the school privatization movement. But they actually, for all these big developments, you need financing. And so the financing piece is also where the developers like are involved. And so Trammell Crow has a capital markets group. It says a deep roster of strategic capital partners, including institutional equity capital partners consisting of life insurance, REITs, private real estate equity funds, and investment advisors, and that they have lending relationships with many leading debt sources. And so I think we have to imagine like that these new programs will be built up with a certain debt finance that might take into account your human capital, right? Like there may be new ways of structuring the debt that creates a cost offset based on like the data profiles of the people who live in these, who live, work, go to school, you know, weed the urban gardens or whatever in these units. Like they're going to come up with creative debt finance things that are going to attach the flow deal infrastructure into the deal flow for this. And then people like Trammell Crow, who've been at this for 50 years, like they'll know the most about how this game is played, like how the sausage gets made. It's hard, like, because I'm not a financial specialist, but like until you dig into it, you're like, oh yeah, like there is debt finance. Like how is that going to all be structured? And with the tokenization and the DAOs, it's something else. So just a couple slides about Mr. Terwilliger. It says the man likely responsible for developing more multifamily housing than anyone else in the country is retiring. So this is what flow is. It's multifamily housing. The man most likely for developing more multifamily than anyone else is Ron Terwilliger, who estimates that he has built nearly 250,000 units of housing during his 30-year plus career at Dallas-based Trammell Crow Residential. Now, I think he was actually operating out of Atlanta, but Trammell Crow is Dallas-based. So like Trammell Crow does all kinds of real estate development, but they had a residential, and I guess within the residential, it was mostly multifamily. So during his 25 years, he developed more apartments than any other firm in the country. Like that's big in the context of what we're talking about with flow. Like Harlan Crow, this is not a little thing. This is actually like they're the insiders in this game. It says, over the last decade, my interest has been shifting from a very dedicated focus on TCR, Trammell Crow Residential, and rental apartments to nonprofits and trying to help those who are less fortunate than I have been. So he's going from market rate into the last, you know, the last decade really focused on the nonprofit, and that would be the housing first thing. So he went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. He was there as playing sports. He was a major donor. It says actually he was the largest individual donor to the U.S. Naval Academy Foundation. A recent estate gift, which one realized will bring his lifetime support for the Academy to more than $52 million. So he came out of the Naval Academy. Now, again, I'm going to say, like within this larger game of sensor technology and frequency, the Navy is at the core of all of this, like the Navy and radar and wave formations, like and frequency signaling. So, you know, he didn't spend a long time in the Navy, but he did, like, he's definitely connected and still connected, because you wouldn't like give tens of millions of dollars if you didn't still have those connections. While he was at the Naval Academy, he was in, he chose to be in the Supply Corps school. And then he worked on a nuclear submarine, which is interesting in terms of Marc Andreessen and the next gen nuclear promotion. Because I think that's what
shot a few hoops while he was there.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And he was like a sporty guy, right? Yeah, he went into debt, but he got a Harvard MBA, and he leveraged his knowledge base, his skill set in supply management. And then his brother, just happened to attend Stanford under a Navy scholarship. So, you know, like sponsorship, they're good. So, in the Supply Corps, again, that would be all the kind of stuff that would be blockchain integrated. And probably what's important about building multifamily housing is it's all about supply chain management. Like, yeah, you have the architecture, but it's about getting, you know, the equipment and the supplies that you need to the place. And
he's good at numbers, he says.
Yes, he's good at numbers.
You know what? I bet he got real math. I bet he was taught math.
Yeah, he probably did. He probably got some real math. Yeah, so he kind of did bust in like a development at Hilton Head, I think, and then he landed in Dallas, and then he did most of his work in Atlanta in real estate in the Southeast, and he had built all these units. So then after he retired, he was a big player in Habitat for Humanity in the international board. So not local, but international. And he gave them $100 million, like a legacy of a commitment of $100 million for Habitat. Now, again, Habitat's like key guy is Jimmy Carter, which again is the Trilateral Commission and Technocracy. And, you know, I thought I saw on the map that I had made that one of the partners with the Bonton was Habitat. And again, who would be in a position of building like cut rate smart housing? Probably Habitat, right? And I think actually there might be, and I have to revisit, but like a connection with Youth Build, which is a work-based learning, like adult learning program, like for people who have non-traditional education pathways. And so this is just, you know, I was Googling to try to see about Internet of Things and Pay for Success and Habitat. And I found a couple things. This is the Habitat for Greater Memphis is examining using Pay for Success finance on one of their deals. And they have a shelter report that's looking at like sustainable sourcing of materials. And they're looking at social impact bonds to pay for that. So it's not like Habitat is totally outside of Pay for Success. They're definitely in it at least a bit. And then on here, I just have the link to Jimmy Carter revealed Rockefeller Republican. And that was actually an article from the Atlantic magazine, like back in the early 80s or something. They're like, shocker, he's not actually what we we thought. And then he's not what anybody thought.
Just a little peanut farmer who was one of us.
Not just a peanut farmer. So yeah, so I'm going to talk about this later, like at the bookend part with Jason. But if you haven't seen the movie, sorry to bother you. I think pretty much it's just telling you straight up like what it is. And the core of this is this idea of like a lifelong labor contract where you live in a dorm environment. And it's framed as, the company is called Worry Free. And it has these people in dorms. If you lived here, you'd be at work already, right? And so I think it's sort of like riffing on Jeff Bezos is the future, and then it veers off into strange like synthetic biology aspects. But like, you know, this was a Forbes article. Could Sorry to Bother You really happen? And we're like, well, yes, probably. It might look like flow. And this is just my last slide, but I talked about this part of a map that I made before about like utopian communities and planned communities, smart communities. And sometimes I've talked about them as being like the Indian reservations, but another model is the company town. And this 18th century UNESCO heritage site is called, let's see, the New Lanark, and it was a cotton mill in Scotland. And essentially the company owned everything. It owned all the housing, it owned the education systems, it managed the social systems, it managed the church. And Robert Owen was like the father of cooperatives, social justice, labor script, like all of the things. And so I really feel like this could happen. And, you know, on this last slide, I have data, the fueling the on-demand economy for smart maker cities, but only in the future, we're not making textiles, we're making data. We're putting our soul. Adam Neumann is taking our salt. He's got the key and taking our salt, and the soul and consciousness are being thrown up into the cloud.
I'm gonna change the locks.
I know. So thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, that's a lot, but it makes sense to me. But I hope it makes sense to others, or at least give them some food for thought to start looking into these things, because it's in every city.
Yeah, it is. I mean, once you have some of the keywords, I'm like, okay, let me pull up the slide of workforce housing in Dallas. Boop, there it is. Okay, let me pull up, you know, co-location. You know, it's all there. So, but it's quite the journey to think about where we came from, the education space, into this new.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I keep running into the education reformers in the housing space. So this, I could never figure out why they were showing up to the housing meetings when I was on that community development commission. Now it makes sense.
Yeah, now it makes sense. Well, so stay tuned, everyone. The next episode will be with my friend Cliff Gomes, and we're going to be talking about property technology and space cults. We'll see you then.